Ashes of Silverwood. A German shepherd led them here. What they found was never meant to surface. The fog rolled in thicker that morning, as if trying to hide what the earth was ready to reveal. When Nova began barking near the twisted oak at Silverwood's edge, no one expected anything more than a squirrel. But Arya had learned to trust her. Nova didn't bark without reason. Not after what they'd seen. Not after what they'd survived. The dirt looked ordinary. Until it didn't. It started with a glint. Something metallic in the soil. Then the edge of fabric. Then the unmistakable silence that falls when a secret resurfaces slow and steady like breath held too long. What they dug up that day reopened more than just an old case. It opened wounds the town had tried to cauterize with denial, bribes, and a ribbon-cutting ceremony built on lies. Nova, the dog who had once been left for dead, had led them here. And the truth she found would burn through everything they thought they knew. The fire crackled softly in the clearing, painting warm, flickering shadows across the boys' faces as they passed around marshmallows and half-told ghost stories. It was the last night of their summer trip for boys, barely 14, on the cusp between childhood and something else. They had pitched their tents beneath the dense canopy of Silverwood National Forest, a place that always felt older than time, where the wind whispered names and owls blinked with memories in their eyes. Lucas Harper sat slightly apart, perched on a fallen log with his hood pulled over his shaggy hair. His laugh was quiet but real, the kind that came in bursts when someone else wasn't looking. He had always been the quiet, one thoughtful, observant. He had a sketchbook somewhere in his tent with half-finished portraits of trees and shoes and faces he didn't know how to explain. He didn't quite fit in, but the boys tolerated him because he had a calm presence, like someone born with a secret he didn't plan to share. Cole, the de facto leader, tossed another stick into the fire and bragged about the raccoon he'd scared off the night before. Jaden and Marcus echoed his laughs, full of adolescent swagger. Lucas smiled faintly but said nothing. The embers floated upward like tiny souls as the forest pressed in. "Hey, I gotta pee," Lucas finally said, standing and brushing dirt from his jeans. "Take a flashlight," Jaden called. "I'll be fine." That was the last time any of them saw him. The boys waited at first in minutes. 15. It wasn't uncommon for Lucas to wander a bit, head in the clouds, notebook in hand. But then 30 minutes passed. Then 40. "Okay, this isn't funny," Marcus said, pacing. "He probably just went to sketch something weird," Cole muttered, though his voice had lost its edge. "He'll be back." But when the hour turned, and the woods around them deepened into true black, the laughter had long since died. They shouted his name first like it was a joke, then like it was a prayer. "Lucas! Yo, come on, man! Lucas!" No answer, just the wind slipping through pine needles like whispers from the dark. They split up, flashlights jittering across twisted roots and thick brush. Jaden nearly tripped over a raccoon, swearing and falling to his knees. Marcus yelled until his voice cracked. Cole kept quiet, moving with increasing urgency but saying little. The clearing had never felt so quiet when they regrouped. The fire was dying. Their eyes were wide and wet with panic now. "He's not here," Jaden said, voice trembling. "We have to tell someone," Marcus added, clutching his arms. Cole didn't answer at first. His jaw was tight, fists clenched. "We wait. Maybe he's playing some kind of game." "You think Lucas plays games like this?" Jaden asked, his voice breaking. That's when Marcus broke into a sprint toward the ranger trail, waving his flashlight like a distress beacon. Within an hour, emergency calls had gone out. By morning, the entire camp was lined with caution tape. Helicopters whirred above. Dogs barked. Adults with walkie-talkies and rifles poured into the forest like blood rushing to a wound. But there was no sign of Lucas. Not a footprint. Not a torn sleeve. Not a whisper of breath. Just the cold remnants of a campfire. And 3 boys, sitting in silence, afraid to look at one another. Somewhere deep in the woods, a notebook lay open beneath moss and pine needles, half-finished sketches smeared by rain. The last drawing was of a crooked tree that didn't exist on any map. And in that moment between the searchlights and the sobs, between the rising sun and the unspoken truths, the first lie was born. That Lucas Harper had simply wandered off. That no one knew what really happened. that boys don't carry guilt the way forests carry echoes. But Silverwood remembered, and it would not stay silent forever. The call came in just after dawn. A boy had vanished during the night last, seen near Campsite 6, Silverwood National Forest. Miguel Alvarez, a newly certified ranger barely a year into the job, threw on his jacket before the second ring ended. He was 24 then. Too young, they said, to carry a place like Silverwood on his shoulders. But Miguel didn't care. He loved this forest, knew its ridges and ravines better than his own apartment. It was his escape and his mission. His father had walked these same paths before cancer took him. Silverwood was the last thing they had shared. And now a boy was missing in it. By the time Miguel arrived, the camp was already swarming. Flashing red lights spilled over pine trunks. A K-9 unit barked against its leash. Restless. One of the search volunteers whispered that the missing kid was named Lucas Harper, 14, quiet, artistic, had wandered off to pee and never came back. Miguel's boots hit the earth hard as he took the lead west of the clearing. "I'll cover the ridge by 7 Pines," he told the deputy. The forest was still cold from the night. Mist curled around the underbrush, swallowing his legs with every step. Miguel's radio crackled with updates, but none of them mattered. He needed to find that boy. "Lucas!" he shouted, voice echoing through the trees. "Lucas! It's Miguel! Ranger Service!" Silence. He pushed forward, brushing past thickets that clawed at his uniform. Every rustle in the bushes made his heart jump. At one point, he saw a dark shape between the trees, breath caught. But it was only a deer, watching him with ancient eyes before leaping into the fog. He searched until dark that day, then the next, and the next. On the 4th day, rain arrived, thin at first, then heavy. The ground turned slick. Helicopters couldn't fly in low visibility. Dogs lost the trail in the mud. Still, Miguel pressed on, soaked to the bone. Flashlight clenched in one hand, map in the other. He traced the forest as if walking a memory, hitting every deer path, every overgrown trail his father had ever shown him. He barely slept, barely ate. The faces of the other rangers blurred, became voices in the dark. He hardly spoke, anymore only listened, for a cry, a rustle, a chance. Sometimes he thought he heard footsteps behind him, light and nervous. He would turn around, heart pounding. Nothing. Day 7. They found a sock, torn at the heel. Miguel dropped to his knees, cradling it like a relic. It was small, white, and soaked through, clinging to his glove like skin. But they couldn't match it to Lucas. No DNA, no blood. Day 9. A rumor spread that maybe the boy had never entered the woods at all, that he had run away, that kids do that maybe this was all a waste of manpower. Miguel didn't speak, just stared into the trees. On day 10, Miguel stood at a bend in the river where the current curved like a hook. He dropped to a crouch, inspecting something glimmering, half buried in silt. A pencil chewed at the end, still sharp. He pulled it out with shaking fingers. "Lucas?" he whispered to the woods, eyes brimming. But no answer came. By day 12, the higher-ups began reducing the perimeter. Volunteers were let go. A new supervisor replaced the shift lead. The word "suspend" hung in the air like smoke. Miguel sat alone that night on a fallen log, rain dripping off the bill of his ranger cap. Shoulders slumped. "I know you're out there," he said to the void. His voice cracked. "I know I missed something. I just don't know where." In his tent, he looked at the pinned map and marked one more circle, then stared at the woods through the plastic flap and prayed. Not out loud, just with his chest open, aching. On day 14, the decision was made. Search terminated. Weather too volatile. No new leads. Presumed drowned. Presumed lost. Presumed gone. Miguel stood motionless when they told him, like someone had carved out his ribs and filled the space with stone. He didn't argue, just nodded. Then, quietly, he went back into the woods one last time before dawn, against orders. He walked for hours without turning on his flashlight. He let the forest speak, let his boots move by instinct, as if Lucas's ghost might reveal itself when no one else was watching. He paused at the river again, took off his glove, and touched the water. "I'm sorry," he whispered, not just to Lucas, to himself, to the forest, to his father, who would have known what to do. Then he stood up, straightened his jacket, and walked back to camp. The tents were coming down. The police had already moved on. But something inside Miguel never left. That ache stayed behind, buried in the soil, like something not yet finished. 10 years later, that same forest would whisper again. And this time, Miguel would listen. The rain didn't stop for 3 days after the search ended. It clung to the shingles of the ranger station like grief that wouldn't let go, dripping slowly, constantly, as if the forest itself was mourning. Miguel sat alone at his desk, soaked socks peeled halfway off, boots streaked with clay. A trail of dried mud led from the door to his chair, but he hadn't noticed. His body was in the room, but his eyes, they were still out there, somewhere between the river bend and the crooked cedar tree where he'd found the pencil. The search logs had been filed. His report, written in long, angry strokes, lay unsigned beside the cold coffee cup. He couldn't finish it. What did you write when the truth was emptiness? The fluorescent lights above him hummed faintly. One flickered. His hand hovered over a yellow manila folder marked H. Lucas Harper, 14 M. missing. He had traced those letters with his thumb so many times the paper had gone soft. He opened the folder again, as if something might have changed inside. As if the boy's smiling photo-black hoodie, eyes half-lidded, shy grin might blink this time. He stared at it for a long moment, then suddenly, violently slammed the folder shut and pushed away from the desk. The chair rolled back and clattered against the filing cabinet. Miguel stood, chest heaving, fists clenched. "Damn it," he roared. He punched the locker beside the radio set. Once, twice, a third time until the steel dented inward and his knuckles bloomed red. Then, nothing. Just the buzz of the lights, the rasp of his own breath. Miguel pressed his back against the wall and slid to the floor. There, between the cold metal cabinets and the emergency gear rack, he folded into himself, head resting against bent knees, shoulders trembling. He didn't cry like the movies show with wails or tears streaming down cheeks. This was quieter, more hollow, a collapse from the inside, like a building where the supports had finally given out. All he could whisper was, "I should have found him," over and over. The other rangers gave him space. No one came in. No one said a word. Maybe they didn't know how. Maybe they'd given up long before he had. But someone he never found out who left a blanket folded beside him and a bottle of water. That night, he slept on the floor of the station, not because he was too tired to go home, but because something about leaving felt like betrayal, as if stepping outside meant accepting that Lucas was truly gone, that the forest had won. But it wasn't just the boy he mourned. It was something else, too, a part of himself that still believed the world was fair if you tried hard enough. That being relentless was enough. He woke the next morning before the sun, quietly, stiffly. He didn't speak a word, just cleaned up the mud, replaced the dented locker, typed 2 lines in his report. Area saturated, search concluded. Subject not recovered. And shut the folder for good. Except, not really. Because 10 years later, that same photograph of Lucas Harper still sat on Miguel's desk. Now older, his face lined with a decade of silent patrols, Miguel still looked at that photo every morning before his shift. He had changed. His hair was cropped shorter, streaks of silver at the edges. His eyes quieter. But the pain? The pain had simply learned to sit down beside him, like an old, unwelcome companion. The Silverwood Ranger Station had changed too. Upgraded radios, new paint on the exterior, digital logs now, no more handwritten field reports. But the soul of the place still remembered. And so did Miguel. Sometimes, on the anniversary, he would walk the riverbank again. Not officially, just walk, with his hands behind his back and his boots sinking into soft moss. Some of the new recruits would ask, "Hey, isn't that where?" And he'd nod. Once. Nobody ever followed. This morning was no different. He poured himself coffee in the break room, nodding absently at the 2 rookie rangers, talking about an upcoming K-9 training exercise happening that afternoon. He didn't join the conversation. Instead, he returned to his office, sat down at his desk, and looked at the photo. Lucas. Same hoodie, Same gaze. Miguel reached out, thumb brushing a corner of the frame. It had faded slightly from the sunlight, but the boy's face was unchanged, frozen in time, still waiting to be found. He let out a slow breath. "Morning, kid," he murmured, like a ritual, like a prayer. He leaned back, rubbed his temples, and tried once again to let it go. But some wounds don't close. They calcify. They etch themselves into routine, into silence, into coffee poured without sugar, into boots tied tight every morning, into the empty space no one else sees but you carry anyway. And that space, it was about to stir. Out in the woods, beneath the moss and pine needles, something had shifted, and Miguel's decade-long excellent and unresolved was about to find a voice again. The morning mist hadn't yet lifted from the Silverwood K9 field when the first sharp bark split the air. It wasn't the bark of boredom or defiance, it was alert, intentional, a warning. From the far end of the training course, all eyes turned to the source. Nova, a full-grown German shepherd with a sable coat like burnished smoke and eyes that held too much history for a dog her age. She stood taut, front paw slightly raised, nose tilted into the breeze like she was sniffing more than just scent, like she was reading the ground's memory. The other dogs, all leashed, shuffled uneasily. Nova was off-leash. Always was. "You going to call her back?" came a voice behind Arya Nguyen, laced with skepticism. She didn't turn around right away. She knew that voice. Captain Mason Doyle. "You don't call Nova," Arya said without looking, kneeling beside a red training dummy half buried in sand. "You ask nicely." Mason made a noise halfway between a scoff and a chuckle. "Or maybe you just don't control her at all." Arya stood and finally turned to face him, brushing dust from her knee. "Control is overrated. I trust her instincts. That's exactly what worries me." Their eyes locked, his stern and clipped like always, hers tired but unwavering. This wasn't their first disagreement about Nova, and it wouldn't be the last. Nova, meanwhile, darted toward a patch of dried grass outside the assigned scent grid. "Nova, return!" Arya called, voice sharp but without panic. Nova hesitated. Just for a second. Then she lowered her head and trotted back, circling Arya in a wide arc before sitting beside her with a huff. Her tail thumped once against Arya's boot. "See?" Arya muttered. "She still broke formation," Mason replied. Again, she sensed something. Probably a rabbit nest. Or maybe your ego in the weeds. Mason's brow lifted. "You joke, but I'm serious. This is a liability." "No," Arya said quietly. "She's a lifeline." Nova looked up, panting lightly. Ears perked not at the voices, but something else. Always listening. Always processing. Captain Doyle folded his arms. "You know how many reports I've had to rewrite because she veered off course during drills?" "I've read them," Arya said. "All of them. But none of them mention how she's the only dog in the unit to locate both hidden scent samples in under a minute, or how she tracked that lost toddler last winter when the weather shut down the drones." And he said nothing. But he didn't look away. "Nova's not disobedient," Arya continued. "She just doesn't follow lines that don't lead anywhere." There was silence between them, broken only by the distant chirp of crows and the rustle of pine branches in the wind. Then, without warning, Nova stood again rigid, nose up, ears locked forward. Arya straightened. "What is it?" The other handlers paused. One of the dogs barked uneasily. Nova turned her head toward the tree line to the north, the direction of the old ranger trails, rarely used now. Her muscles coiled like springs. "Don't," Mason warned. "Do not let her go." But Nova was already trotting, fast, purposeful. "Nova, heel," Arya commanded. The shepherd ignored her. "Damn it," Mason hissed, reaching for his radio. "No." Arya stopped him with a hand. "Wait, you're not serious." But she was. Arya took off after the dog without another word, boots crunching over gravel, pushing past the scent cones and boundary flags. Mason cursed under his breath but followed. The other handlers watching, unsure whether to join or stand down. They moved through underbrush and thorn-tangled brush, deeper into the green silence of the north sector. Nova ran ahead, but never out of sight, always just close enough for Arya to follow, always just far enough to say, "Trust me." And she did, because Arya had learned early on, Nova wasn't reckless. She was precise. Too precise for a creature without language. But that's what made her special. Nova was never trained to be obedient. She was trained to be right. Her file was thick with complaints memos about non-compliance, veering off grid, challenging lead handlers. But it also held the only 3 confirmed solo recoveries in the unit's history. 3 lives saved because Nova didn't do what she was told. She did what she knew. And that's why Arya fought to be her partner. Because where others saw disobedience, Arya saw something else. A dog who listened to a frequency no one else could hear. By the time they stopped, they were nearly 400 yards off the mapped course. The pine trees grew denser here, the air cooler, earth damp and giving. Nova was standing perfectly still, nose hovering inches above a patch of disturbed moss. Arya slowed, heart hammering. "Nova." "What is it, girl?" The shepherd whined low in her throat, tail stiff, paw raised. Arya stepped closer, squatted, examined the ground. It wasn't much, just a few leaves turned over, a narrow depression in the soil, unnatural and precise, like something had been placed or buried. "Captain," she said quietly, "you need to see this." Mason joined her, panting lightly, brow furrowed. She gestured to the spot. He crouched. His eyes scanned, then narrowed. "Is that?" "Looks like a compression site. Recent." Mason was silent for a long beat. Then he looked up at Nova. The dog met his gaze directly, steady, almost defiant, then looked back at the dirt. Mason exhaled slowly. "For the record," he muttered, "this doesn't mean I trust her." Nova blinked once, then padded closer to Arya, sitting down with the quiet pride of someone who already knew. Arya smiled faintly and reached down to scratch behind her ears. "No," she said softly, "but maybe it means you're starting to trust the why." The wind shifted. It wasn't much, just a ripple through the high trees, a faint stirring of pine needles, but Nova felt it before anyone else. One moment, she was walking alongside Arya through the southern field during their scheduled patrol rotation, nose low and relaxed, tail swaying. The next, she stopped mid-step, rigid, listening to something the human ear couldn't name. Arya noticed instantly. "Nova?" she asked gently. The German shepherd didn't move, not even a twitch. Her breath slowed, her ears lifted higher. Then without warning, she bolted. "Nova!" The name tore out of Arya's throat like a crack of thunder, but it was already too late. Nova was gone through the brush, past the training markers, over the rusted chain-line fence that marked the beginning of the restricted zone, the part of Silverwood Forest that no one entered. Not anymore, because that trail led nowhere, only into shadow. Arya didn't think. She ran. Behind her, someone yelled. A voice on the radio. Captain Doyle, maybe, or another handler from the far end of the field. Protocol would have demanded she stop, report, wait for backup. But protocol didn't apply when Nova ran like that. Not with that posture, not with that certainty. She ducked under the loose fencing, branches scraping her arms, her boots catching on roots slick with old rain. The temperature dropped almost instantly, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. Silverwood's restricted zone wasn't marked on public maps anymore. After the incident 10 years ago, most of the old ranger paths had been left to rot, swallowed by vines, devoured by silence. People called it the Forbidden Green now. Not officially, of course, but everyone knew what it meant. Don't go there, don't follow the echoes. But Arya followed anyway. Because Nova was still visible and burst starting between thickets, a sable ghost in motion, pulling towards something with relentless gravity. "Nova, slow down," Arya panted, branches whipping across her face. No use. The dog didn't even glance back. Whatever she'd picked up, whatever scent or memory or instinct had pulled her this ferret, was older than orders, deeper than training. Arya's lungs burnt. She pushed past a fallen log, slipped down a soft incline, and emerged into a hollow where the trees grew wider apart. The air here felt wrong. Too still, too cold. A hush, like the world was waiting for something to be uncovered. Nova was standing at the edge of a dry creek bed, frozen. She didn't bark. She didn't whine. Just stared at a point on the opposite bank, something half hidden in the moss and rot. Arya stepped closer, her heart in her throat. "What is it, girl?" The dog didn't move. Arya crossed the shallow dip, boots squelching in the soft mud, and followed Nova's gaze. It took her a moment to understand what she was looking at. A strip of torn canvas, faded red, threadbare, caught on a splintered root like it had been ripped from a larger piece and abandoned in a rush. Arya reached down, fingers trembling, and pulled it loose. On the underside, in weathered black ink, she saw a name barely legible. L. Callahan. She froze. Lucas Callahan, 14 years old, vanished without a trace during a camping trip in this very forest 10 years ago. His photo still sat in the ranger stations. Still showed up on missing persons bulletins every year on the anniversary. The boy no one found. Nova gave a soft whine behind her. Arya turned the fabric over again and again, breath short. It was real. Not a plant. Not a trick of the woods. Real and untouched for who knew how long. The fibers were brittle. The color almost erased, but it had survived, hidden, waiting. And Nova had led her here. Arya's mouth went dry. She reached for her radio, then stopped. Because the second she called it in, this place would be overrun. Rangers, drones, search dogs, news vans. A reopening of wounds no one had managed to close. And if this was all they found, a strip of cloth, it would be dismissed, buried again under reports and skepticism. She looked down at Nova. The dog was staring at her, eyes dark and silent. "You knew," Arya whispered. "Didn't you?" The shepherd lowered her head. Her tail didn't wag. It wasn't pride. It was grief. Arya clenched the fabric tighter in her fist. "Okay," she murmured. "Okay." They stood there in the hush of the forbidden green, two figures alone at the edge of something ancient and unspoken. Then a crackle of static broke the moment. "Unit 3, respond." "Arya, come in. Where are you?" It was Mason. She hesitated. Nova stepped closer, brushing against her leg. The air felt heavier now. A low wind rustled through the trees like a voice trying to speak. Arya clicked the radio on. "This is Unit 3. I'm with Nova. She went off course." "Off course into the restricted zone?" Mason's voice was clipped, furious. "Yes." Silence. "Are you safe?" he asked finally. "Yes," she replied, then paused. "But we found something." Nova lifted her head. A howl built in her chest low. Long, mournful. It spilled into the trees like a sound pulled from memory. And somewhere far off, in the silence that followed, Arya swore she heard an echo. The first drop of rain landed on the back of Arya's neck, cold as a needle. She didn't flinch, didn't move. She just watched Nova. The shepherd was standing stock still beside the dry creek bed, ears up, tail rigid, not in alarm, but something closer to reverence. Her nose hovered inches above the ground, tracking something beneath the mulch. Then, without hesitation, Nova began to dig. It wasn't frantic, not the playful scramble of a dog chasing a squirrel. It was methodical, purposeful, like she already knew what lay beneath. Arya stepped closer. "Nova, what is it?" The dog didn't stop. Clumps of earth flew up behind her, splattering Arya's boots, mixing with the sudden rainfall that now came steadily soft at first, then heavier, soaking the fabric strips still clenched in Arya's hand. And then Nova froze. One paw lifted, suspended in air. A smell hit Arya deep, metallic, clinging to the back of her throat. Not just decay, but something old, preserved by time and silence. Arya crouched low. The soil was looser now, darker, and protruding from the bed of wet leaves and tangled roots was a single, pale curve of bone. She stared at it, heart hammering against her ribs. Human, there was no doubt. A partial rib, then the jagged edge of what looked like a clavicle. Time had worn them down, turned them the color of driftwood. Moss clung to the edges. Roots had grown through the empty spaces. But it was a body, or what was left of one. Arya swallowed hard. Her hands went instinctively for the radio clipped to her vest. "This is Officer Arya Nguyen. I'm in the restricted zone just south of Old Trail 9. We have remains, human remains. Requesting immediate backup. Bring forensics." Static crackled. Captain Doyle's voice came in, sharp and disbelieving. "Did you say human remains?" "Yes, sir," Arya said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Nova found it. It's buried shallow. Looks old." "How old?" She looked down again. Nova was now seated beside the grave. Not barking, not digging, just sitting, watchful. Her posture wasn't excited, it was solemn. "I don't know, sir," Arya said quietly, "but it wasn't meant to be found." There was a pause. Then Mason's voice came through again, clipped. "Stay put. We're en route. ETA 20 minutes. Keep the site undisturbed." Arya clicked off the radio, then knelt in the mud beside Nova. The rain soaked through her uniform now, chilling her spine. But she didn't care, because the bones were whispering. Not literally, but in the stillness of the clearing again, the soft patter of rain on leaves, and the eerie quiet of the trees, something about the air had changed, like a weight had shifted. She looked again at the shallow grave. Who were they? The obvious answer was already forming in her mind. Lucas Callahan. The name burned in her thoughts like a flare. The missing boy. Gone without a trace. And nowhere. Maybe. Or maybe not. She glanced again at Nova, who hadn't moved. "You stayed," Arya whispered. "Like a soldier." The shepherd blinked slowly. Her ears flicked as the rain intensified. Arya's breath fogged in front of her. A low mist had started creeping through the trees, curling around their legs like something alive. It made the world feel smaller, like a secret tucked into a diary no one meant to reopen. She studied the ground. There were more bones, faint outlines beneath the leaves, a socket, a hint of vertebrae. The remains had been scattered slightly, likely from erosion and weather, but there was a structure, a rough orientation. Whoever had been buried here hadn't been alone long. The soil told a story. It was black, rich with rot and moss, compacted over time. Arya noticed the strange absence of wild Lefino birds. No insects, not even worms, like the ground itself had recoiled from what it covered. Nova stirred slightly, shifting her weight. Arya reached out and placed a gentle hand on the shepherd's back. "You brought me here for a reason, didn't you?" The dog didn't answer, but her body remained still and firm, unmoving. Arya had read once that dogs mourn in silence. They wait beside their dead, not because they're trained to, but because they understand, in a way humans still struggle to. Some grief needs no words, no closure, just presence. The wind rose, curling through the trees like a sigh. In the distance, a faint set of sirens began to pierce the quiet. Arya exhaled. It sounded like a prayer. Nova didn't react. She simply stayed rooted beside the body like a sentinel guarding something sacred. Time blurred. Rain dripped from her hair, traced down her spine. The soil turned slick beneath her knees. Still, she didn't move. Didn't wipe the tears from her cheek. Tears she hadn't even noticed were falling. This wasn't just a discovery. It was a reckoning. And as the sirens grew louder, and the mist thickened around them, Arya looked down one last time at the bones under the leaves. She didn't know who they belonged to yet. But she made a quiet vow. They wouldn't be forgotten. Not again. Nova, still and soaked to the skin, lowered her head gently toward the grave just once. As if she understood. The name came quietly. No press conference. No dramatic music swell. Just a single page laid down on Captain Doyle's desk, damp at the corners from the storm. And in the middle of that page, printed in precise forensic type, remains identified via dental and genetic matching. Dylan Rivers, age 17, last seen the 2nd of March. Mason didn't move at first, just stared at the name like it didn't belong there, as if somehow it had slipped into the report by some cruel error in the universe's filing system. But it was real. The text had triple-checked. Dylan Rivers, a name that once flashed across every screen in the state. A boy with an easy smile and sun-bleached hair who vanished after basketball practice and never came home. Arya stood near the doorway of the ranger station office, rain still drying in her collar. She had seen that name 2 months ago, printed on missing posters, taped to gas pumps and hardware store windows. "Have you seen Dylan?" His face had haunted grocery aisles and late-night local news. But in person, it had always felt distant. A case for someone else. A family far away. Now his bones were in the ground, and she had stepped over them. Captain Doyle exhaled and pushed the page aside. His voice came out flat. "They've notified the parents." That sentence dropped like a hammer in the room. No one spoke. Across the hall, Nova lay curled beside the back door. her fur still damp, muzzle resting on crossed paws. She hadn't left Arya's side since the discovery. Not during the long hours of processing the scene. Not during the silence afterward. She knew, Arya whispered. Mason looked up. What? She nodded slowly toward the shepherd. Nova. She knew it was someone. Not just remains. Not just a scent. The way she sat there, her throat tightened. She was grieving. Mason didn't reply. He just turned to the window, where the rain had started again, light as breath on the glass. And somewhere between that silence and the steady ticking of the wall clock, Arya remembered the news footage. It had aired every night for a week. Please, if anyone has seen our son. The father's voice had cracked at the word son. He was standing in front of the Silverwood County Sheriff's Department, clutching a wrinkled photo of Dylan printed on cheap paper. His hand trembled so badly, it looked like the image would tear in half. Beside him, the mother, Lena Riverswas, stone. Her arms were crossed tightly over her chest, as if trying to hold herself together. Her lips barely moved when she spoke. He wouldn't just run away, she had whispered. He was kind. He had plans. He was accepted into state for environmental science. He loved this park. The camera had zoomed in on her eyes. Hollow. Not weeping, not wild, just empty. The kind of grief that calcifies. Arya blinked the memory away. They said he was last seen near the Silverwood perimeter, she said, near the closed trails. Mason nodded. His car was found abandoned near the Ranger 5 outpost. No signs of struggle. No fingerprints. Just vanished. Arya stared down at her boots. They were still stained with the clay from the dig site, from where Nova had unearthed a truth that should never have been buried. Do they know how he died? She asked quietly. Mason hesitated, then reached for the second page on the desk. Forensics says trauma to the skull, possibly blunt force, defensive injuries to the arms. They think he fought back. Arya closed her eyes. She pictured it too clearly. A boy in the woods, the wrong place, the wrong time, and then silence, then dirt. Then 4 months of wind and rain, until even the forest tried to forget. 4 months, she murmured. Mason looked up. What? That boy sat under the leaves for 4 months, and no one saw. No one looked. Not until Nova. Her voice broke slightly. Nova stirred from the corner, lifting her head. It wasn't guilt that burned in Arya's chest. It was something worse. A gnawing truth that if Nova hadn't bolted, if she had obeyed orders like every other dog, Dylan would still be missing, still anonymous, still a ghost. They want us to release a statement, Mason said. Media's already calling. They'll want details, timelines, photos. Arya shook her head. Not yet. Give his parents time, Mason sighed. It's not up to us anymore. This just became a homicide case. The word felt cold, too clinical for the aching weight of the moment. Nova had risen now. She padded over and rested her chin against Arya's leg. No bark, no whine, just contact, just warmth. Arya ran a hand gently along the shepherd's ears. You did good, girl, she whispered. Mason watched them for a beat. Then he looked away. Outside, the mist was thickening again, as if the forest itself was exhaling some old, terrible breath it had been holding for months. The crime scene had stopped being just a patch of earth. Now it was a wound, still open, still bleeding secrets. Even after forensics had bagged the body, labeled the coordinates, and drawn their invisible lines, the air still carried the kind of quiet that didn't belong to any forest. A hush, too intentional, too afraid. It was Arya who returned first, boots pressing into the soft, chewed-up soil. Rain had made the earth heavy, but not enough to wash away the truth. Nova walked beside her, leash loose, tail down, not in fear, but reverence. You remember, don't you? Arya whispered. Nova didn't bark, didn't move ahead. She just walked the same circle around the clearing, 1, 2, 3 times. Then she stopped, ears forward, nose twitching. The text had cleared out only hours before. But even now, something still lingered beneath the pine needles and damp rot. Arya crouched beside Nova, brushing back the moss-covered mulch near where the shepherd had first dug. She felt it more than she saw it. A flash of red against the dark soil. Delicate, out of place. She tugged gently, and the cigarette emerged. Lipstick smeared on the filter. A brand no one smoked in Silverwood. Not anymore. Arya held it between gloved fingers and turned toward Nova. Good girl. Nova's tail flicked once, then stilled again. She was already sniffing toward the tree line. Arya pocketed the cigarette into a small evidence bag. The storm had preserved just enough. Even the scent of perfume still clung faintly to the paper. Floral. Synthetic. Too loud for these woods. Nova moved again, nose close to the earth. Arya followed as the dog led her through low brush, where the ground grew soft with leaf sludge and old bark. Then Nova stopped. Another dig. This one, shallower. And there, half buried under a flattened patch of leaves, was a handkerchief. Faded white linen, soaked with something darker. Blood. Fresh. 4 months ago. Now, it had turned the color of rust. Arya didn't breathe. She didn't need to. The forest had gone completely silent. She placed the handkerchief gently into a second bag and whispered, "Whose blood, Dylan?" The question floated unanswered, until Nova barked once, sharp. It was rare for her, always calculated. Arya looked up just in time to see the shepherd pawing at something deeper in the base of a fallen tree. She moved fast, clearing the moss, snapping a branch, feeling the rough bark bite into her knuckles as she reached into the hollow. Her fingers touched metal. She pulled it free. A phone, caked in dirt, waterlogged, screen spider webbed with cracks but intact. Arya stared at it in disbelief. "Nova," she whispered. "You just gave us his last words." They would need a forensics team to dry it, extract anything left. But if there was even a flicker of GPS history, a text, a photo, would matter. She stood there, soaked, fingers muddy, holding a dead boy's secrets in one hand and his unanswered questions in the other. And Nova, silent beside her, simply sat again. It was the same position she had taken when they found Dylan, like a vigil. Back at the ranger station, Arya spread the items across the evidence table. Captain Doyle stared in silence, then muttered, "One of these doesn't belong." She knew what he meant. The lipstick-stained cigarette. Dylan didn't smoke. According to the parents, he hated the smell, said it reminded him of his grandfather's cancer. "This wasn't his," Arya confirmed. "And it's not from town. I ran a quick scan. The brands only sold in 2 stores north of the state line." "Someone older," Mason said. "Someone not from here." He turned over the handkerchief, his brow furrowed. "Initials." "What?" He pointed to the corner barely visible under the dried blood. 2 faint letters in cursive embroidery. LS. Arya's pulse ticked. She didn't recognize the initials, but someone would. "What about the phone?" Mason asked. "Still wet," Arya said. "I've sent it to tech. They'll try to dry the motherboard, run data recovery." Mason crossed his arms. "And Nova? She's not done." Arya moved toward the equipment locker. From a locked drawer, she retrieved a small device, Nova's vest-mounted camera, used for scent training documentation. She had taken it off after the discovery, assuming the battery was dead. It wasn't. She plugged it in. The footage flickered onto the laptop. A blur of green, branches whipping past, the jostling of a sprint, and then stillness. Nova standing inches from the shallow grave. Then something else. Before digging, she turned her head toward the tree line, toward something or someone we couldn't see. "Back it up," Mason said. Arya did. Again, Nova paused. Eyes forward, muscles braced, but not in fear. In recognition. She saw someone, Arya murmured. She sensed someone, maybe even caught their scent. Mason leaned forward. 4 months later, Arya shook her head. Not then. Before she dug. This wasn't random. Something told her where to dig. Mason sat down hard in the chair. "You think whoever did this came back?" "I think they never left." Outside, thunder cracked low across the hills. Inside, the lights flickered. Nova, curled under the desk, gave a soft growl toward the door. The truck rumbled up the gravel trail, a sound swallowed almost whole by the pine canopy of Silverwood. The rain had stopped hours ago, but the forest still held the scent of wet bark and the distant hush of water slipping from leaves. Miguel Alvarez didn't speak as he drove. He hadn't spoken much in years, not unless duty required it. At 39, his beard was thicker, flecked with gray. and his uniform didn't fit quite the same anymore. The badge still gleamed, but only because he kept it clean, out of habit, not pride. Dispatch hadn't said much, just coordinates. A discovery during a K-9 drill, possible homicide. They requested a ranger with long-term knowledge of the terrain. No one had longer memory in these woods than Miguel. No one still working, anyway. As the truck climbed a narrow bend and stopped at the orange tape that now marked the perimeter, Miguel put the vehicle in park, cut the engine, and just sat. He knew this place. Even before he stepped out, even before his boots hit the mud and the damp air wrapped around him like a familiar ache, he knew. It was the silence. That same unnatural stillness. The kind of quiet that didn't come from nature, but from something buried beneath it. He ducked under the tape. A younger officer nodded toward him. "Ranger Alvarez? Thanks for coming." Miguel didn't respond. His eyes were already scanning. Over the boots of crime scene techs, over the drone gear, the glow of flashlights and yellow evidence markers. And then he saw her. Nova. The German Shepherd sat under a tree, posture alert but still. Her eyes followed every motion, but she didn't move. Beside her stood a young woman, Aria Nguyen, if he recalled the briefing right. K-9 officer, new to the district. She was watching the scene like someone trying to see beneath it. He respected that. But Miguel didn't approach her. He walked instead toward the center of the clearing. Slowly. Each step, deliberate, almost reverent. There was nothing visible now. The body had been removed. The ground had been combed, cataloged, turned, and pressed back. But it was still here. The shape of it. The echo. Miguel stood still. His breathing shallowed. "Ranger?" Aria approached him, cautious. "We weren't told you were coming personally." He nodded, but his eyes never left the soil. "Did the dog find the body?" Aria glanced toward Nova. "She did. Broke formation mid-drill and led me straight here." Miguel closed his eyes. A sound came from his throat too soft to be a word, too heavy to be just breath. "This place," he said finally. 17 years ago. I searched these woods, day and night, for 14 days. Aria's expression shifted. "Lucas?" Miguel didn't answer. He didn't need to. He turned in a slow circle. His boots scraped over roots, moss, and memory. "There was a tree," he muttered. "Old birch, with a lightning scar. We marked it as a boundary. Beyond it, the terrain was deemed too unstable, too wet." His gaze fell on the shattered stump near the edge of the clearing. It was barely more than a jagged husk now. But it had once been a birch. The scar still there, blackened and faint. Miguel stared at it like it had whispered his name. "I stopped here," he said. "I told myself the terrain was too dangerous to keep going. I turned back. He clenched his jaw. Aria didn't speak. Nova stood and took 3 slow steps forward, then sat beside Miguel. Her presence quiet, grounding. Miguel looked down at her, a question trembling behind his eyes. "She knew," he said. "This dog, she knew what was here." "She didn't hesitate," Aria replied. "Didn't need a command, like something pulled her." Miguel crouched beside Nova. He didn't reach out, didn't touch, just watched her eyes. "They see more than we do," he whispered. "They remember differently." He exhaled and looked around the clearing again. "How deep was the body?" he asked. "Barely covered," Aria said. "Time and rainfall did most of the hiding. It was shallow, intentional." Miguel nodded. "She was guarding him," he murmured, more to himself. "The dog, sitting like she was waiting." He stood. The air felt heavier now, not just from weather, but from all the years he'd carried what he hadn't said. "The boy you found, Dylan." Miguel's voice cracked slightly. "Did he have any connection to Lucas?" "We're looking," Aria said gently. "Different schools, different age, but we're not ruling anything out." Miguel turned away. A memory rose, sharp and sudden. Lucas's smile as he ran ahead that morning, chasing the wind. The soft echo of his laughter through the trees. The way the forest swallowed it like it never happened. "I passed this clearing," Miguel said again, quieter now. "I walked this exact path, and I missed him, or I missed something." "No one blames you," Aria said. Miguel didn't reply. He just looked up toward the sky, The branches, the faint light filtering through mist and time. And then, for the first time in years, he said his son's name aloud. Lucas. A single word. Soft. Breaking. Nova sat back down, eyes never leaving him. In her silence, there was something close to understanding. Scene 4.1. Unlocking the Past. The tech lab at Silverwood's Ranger Station was nothing more than a converted equipment, room concrete floor, cheap LED panels, and a humming row of forensic machines that looked like they belonged in a much larger precinct. But tonight, it felt like the heart of something much bigger, something about to crack open. Arya Nguyen stood beside the digital forensics technician, arms crossed, jaw tense. The scent of damp pine still clung to her uniform, her boots caked with the forest's memory. She hadn't even showered since the discovery. Couldn't. Not when Dylan's phone scratched, mud-caked, and waterlogged was drying under a specialized vacuum chamber just feet away. "How long?" she asked. The technician, Orrin Baines, late 30s, always smelled faintly of solder, didn't look up from his keyboard. "We're in. Just cloning the NAND now. His OS was toast, but the chip's intact." Arya didn't pretend to understand the full tech lingo. What mattered was simple. The phone might still be able to speak for him. Dylan Rivers. 17. Missing 4 months. And now, her jaw tightened again. Orrin's fingers tapped a final command. Then the display lit up. A list of file names populated the monitor. Hundreds. Mostly image files. He was taking pictures, Orrin muttered. "Right up to the last hour. You'll want to see this." He clicked on a folder labeled DCIM 100 Andro. Thumbnails loaded. Hiking trails. Smiling selfies. Shots of moss-covered trees and low-light sunsets. And then near the bottom time stamped just 4 days before he disappeared. IMG _ 9837.jpg. IMG _ 9838.jpg. IMG _ 9839.jpg. The last one made Arya's breath catch. "Open that," she whispered. Orrin double-clicked. The photo filled the screen. It was dark. Lit only by the glow of firelight, probably from a small campfire. But the image was clear enough. Dylan stood in profile, mid-motion, arms out in a sharp gesture of frustration. And across from him, partially obscured by shadow, stood another teen. Brown hair, fist clenched at his side, shoulders tense. Cole Fielding. Arya stared at it. The firelight cast hard, flickering edges on both boys. But it was unmistakably Cole, wearing a varsity jacket, half-zipped. His face was turned slightly, but the outline was there. So was the anger. "There's metadata," Orrin said softly. "Want to see?" She nodded, not breaking her gaze from the screen. With a few keystrokes, Orrin pulled up the EXIF data. Timestamp, the 18th of March, 10:42 p.m. GPS coordinates followed, landing directly within Silverwood's restricted perimeter, just under 300 yards from where Nova had found the remains. Her pulse rose. "Can you verify the sequence of photos?" she asked. "Was this taken right before the phone shut off?" Orrin nodded, clicking back to the file list. This was the last photo taken. There were 2 failed image saves right after corrupt data blocks. That usually means the device was abruptly powered down or damaged. He didn't say destroyed. He didn't have to. Arya's thoughts raced. Dylan had photographed the confrontation. Maybe out of instinct, maybe for proof, maybe because some part of him had known things were spiraling. She studied the image again. There was something else, something small and easily missed. In the corner of the photo, behind Dylan's figure, was a glint of metal, almost unnoticeable, but not to trained eyes. A flask, or maybe a hunting knife sheath. Hard to tell, but it didn't belong to either boy. "Can we enhance that?" she asked, pointing. Orrin nodded, zoomed, applied a few filters. The shape became clearer. Definitely a flask, stainless steel, monogrammed, though the initials weren't visible. "That's not Dylan's," Arya murmured. "Nope," Orrin agreed. "You think someone else was there?" She didn't answer. Not yet. But her gut stirred. A memory flashed Nova freezing mid-run, then tearing into the underbrush like something was calling her. Animals didn't follow hunches. They followed scent, memory, instinct, and Nova had gone straight to the rot. Arya reached into her jacket pocket, pulling out the Ziploc evidence bag she'd been carrying since the scene Dylan's cracked phone case, coated in old soil and faint traces of blood. She placed it gently beside Oren's keyboard. "Cross, reference this photo's location with the other items found," she said. "Lipstick, stained cigarette, blood-stained handkerchief. They were all within 20 feet. Already started mapping it," Oren said. "And I've got Nova's camera feed syncing to the grid overlay." "Thank you." She stepped back, away from the glowing screen, trying to steady her breath. But her mind was already ahead, skipping forward through the implications. Cole. If this was really him in the photo and every part of her knew it was, then his lies went far deeper than teenage panic. He hadn't just seen Dylan last. He may have been the last thing Dylan ever saw. But the most haunting part wasn't the photo. It was the expression on Dylan's face. Lit by fire, caught mid-sentence. A flicker of disbelief and betrayal etched into his eyes. Like he'd expected better from the boy standing across from him. Like he hadn't run. Not at first. Arya exhaled slowly. The photo wasn't just evidence. It was a fragment of final moments. A story snapped in one blink of light. Behind her, Nova's collar jingled faintly as the dog rose from her resting position by the door and padded closer. She looked up at Arya, ears twitching slightly. Arya met those amber eyes. "You saw it too, didn't you?" she whispered. Nova didn't move, didn't blink. But her present solid, unwavering grounded Arya in a way no logic could. "We're not done," Arya said softly, mostly to herself. "We're just getting started." Outside, the trees groaned softly in the wind. Silverwood wasn't giving up its secrets easily. But the past was no longer locked. It had just left a trail. The interrogation room in the back wing of the Silverwood precinct always felt colder than the rest of the station. Maybe it was the unpainted concrete walls, or the way fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like they knew too much. Maybe it was the weight of truth trying to claw its way out. Arya Nguyen sat in silence across from Cole Fielding. His eyes kept drifting toward the door. He was clean-cut, put together, polite but too rehearsed. Not once had he asked how Dylan died. He just kept asking if he could go. "You said you hadn't seen Dylan in weeks," Arya began, voice level. "That's right," Cole replied, clearing his throat. "Not since, February." "No contact? No texts?" Cole hesitated. Just a flicker. We kinda drifted. I was busy with wrestling. He was going through stuff." Arya let the pause hang. Across the table, Nova lay silently beside her chair, unmoving except for the occasional twitch of an ear. She wasn't officially allowed in interviews, but no one had stopped her, and Cole noticed her. His eyes flicked toward the dog more often than to Arya. "So, you wouldn't know why he had a picture of you on his phone?" Arya said casually, slipping a photo across the table. "The firelight photo." Cole's hand stiffened as he took it, eyes tracing the scene. Dylan's expression mid-argument, Cole's own silhouette clear as glass. "That," he stammered, "that's not recent. That's from some camping trip, way back. Metadata says otherwise. Taken the 18th of March. GPS matches the clearing where we found Dylan's body." Cole's breath hitched, then he leaned back in his chair. I don't know why he took that." "Were you alone?" Silence. Then quietly, "Number. Marcus and Jayden were there too. We were blowing off steam. Dylan tagged along last minute." Arya didn't react, didn't blink, just watched his confession settle in the air like smoke. She stood. "I'm going to need to speak to both of them. Today." Cole opened his mouth to protest, but she was already at the door. Marcus Halley slouched in the next room like the walls themselves were boring him. He wore a gray hoodie, tugging the sleeves over his hands. His knee bounced. "We were just hiking," he muttered. "Dylan liked the woods. It wasn't weird. You didn't think to report him missing when he didn't come back with you?" Marcus looked away. "We thought he went home. We figured he just got mad and left early. He used to do that." Arya raised an eyebrow. "Didn't it bother you that no one heard from him again?" His foot stopped bouncing. "Look, we didn't think it was our job to track him." He was always kind of dramatic, always trying to get someone to chase after him. Nova shifted again, a low, almost imperceptible whine in her throat. Arya leaned forward, quiet and pointed. "Were you the last one to see him alive?" Marcus's throat bobbed. "I don't know. 2 left first. I had a ride." She narrowed her eyes. "From who?" "Jaden." Jaden Morales sat with his hoodie off, hair still damp from a rushed shower. He looked less guarded than the others, but there was something brittle about him, like he'd been holding his breath for weeks. "He was scared," Jaden said, staring at his folded hands. "Dylan, I mean. That night, he said someone was following him." Arya blinked. "You never mentioned that before." Jaden shrugged helplessly. "No one ever asked. You guys were focused on the body and the dog." He glanced at Nova, who sat stone still by Arya's side. "He told Cole something that night. I don't know what, but whatever it was, it messed with him. They were yelling. Loud." "What about Marcus?" Jaden looked down. "Marcus said we should just leave. Said Dylan was trying to stir up drama again. He always thought Dylan was too emotional. But something was different this time." Arya's voice dropped. "Did you see Dylan leave the campfire?" "Number I left first. I didn't want to be around when they started swinging." "Swinging?" He looked up ashamed. "Cole and Dylan had history. Not always good." Arya filed the words away like blades. 3 boys, 3 stories that didn't quite match, and 1 body. Later that night, Arya stood alone in the evidence room, the fluorescent light casting a cold glare across the boxes. She replayed the footage from Nova's collar cam, again watching as the dog had charged through the trees, weaving like she already knew where she was going. She paused the video at frame 0 hours, 6 minutes, and 32 seconds. Nova had stopped, head raised slightly, just before the digging. Her ears were angled not forward, but to the left, listening to something. Someone. There'd been a third presence in those woods. Not just Dylan, not just Cole. A shadow just out of sight. She pulled out the GPS trace overlay. Nova's scent trail looped wider than expected, almost a full crescent arc before settling near Dylan's body, like she had chased something, or someone, away first. Behind her, the door creaked. Miguel. He stepped in quietly, hands in his jacket pockets, eyes scanning the screen. "They're hiding something," he said softly. Arya nodded. "I know." He stepped closer, looking over the GPS map. 3 boys, 3 shadows. "But I think you've only found 2. Arya looked at him. "What are you saying?" Miguel met her eyes. "There was someone else there that night." She waited. "The woods don't forget," he added almost to himself. And then he left as quietly as he came. That night, Arya sat in her truck, under the misting rain. Nova curled in the back seat, her breathing steady. She replayed each boy's words in her mind, cross-examining tone, tempo, and the tremble they tried to hide. Cole's defensiveness, Marcus's disinterest, Jaden's guilt. 3 stories woven together like a poorly stitched wound. And underneath it all, a single thread pulling tighter. Fear, not of the woods, but of each other. Nova shifted in her sleep, paw twitching. Arya whispered, "We'll find the truth, girl." The shadows were gathering, but so was the storm. The blinds in Captain Doyle's office were always drawn. Morning sunlight slanted through the slats in soft golden beams, catching on the dust in the air. But today, the warmth didn't reach his voice. He closed the door behind Arya and gestured to the seat across from him. "Sit." She didn't. Just stayed standing, arms loosely crossed, Nova planted like a statue beside her. Doyle sighed. He looked tired. His tie hung slightly askew, the veins at his temple a little more pronounced than usual. "There's pressure," he said quietly. "And I don't mean from me." "I figured," Arya replied. "They call from City Hall yet?" He nodded. "Twice this morning. Councilman Bennett's office. The boy Coley's the nephew, and apparently very involved in some community redevelopment initiative downtown. Victor wants us to proceed with caution." Arya didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her silence said it all. Doyle leaned forward. "Arya, look, I know you're close to this. I know you've seen things in those woods the rest of us haven't. But this case, this is the kind that burns careers, not just yours." She finally sat, slow and deliberate. "You're asking me to back off?" "I'm asking you not to overreach," he said carefully. You've got an ID on the victim. That's a win. But it's not a conviction. And now we've got 3 minors from high-profile families caught up in whatever the hell happened out there. You need to tread lightly. Arya's jaw flexed. And what if one of them killed Dylan? Doyle didn't answer. Instead, he looked past her past Novato, the sealed file on his desk. The one with Dylan Rivers' name printed across the top in red block letters. I'm not saying drop it, he said at last. But I am saying, stop waving it around like a flag. Take your findings, build your case, but keep it clean and above all quiet. There was a beat of silence. Arya reached into her inner coat pocket and pulled out a flash drive. She placed it gently on his desk. Footage from Nova's collar, GPS overlay, audio spikes, and timestamps from the clearing. You'll hear someone run just before she stops at the body. Directional mic puts it northeast. Doyle didn't touch it. I know what I'm doing, Arya added. I'm not trying to sink careers. I'm trying to speak for the boy in the ground. Doyle's expression softened for a second. Just a second. I know you are. She stood. I won't bring City Hall into it, but I won't ignore what Nova finds either. He let her go without another word. Out in the hallway, the precinct buzzed with the hum of printers, phones, and rain tapping the high windows. Arya moved like a ghost through it all. Nova padded beside her, silent, alert. Inside the elevator, she stared at her reflection in the steel panel, shadows under her eyes, a tension in her posture she couldn't quite shake since they found Dylan's body. She didn't need to be told twice that this case was political. Victor Bennett's influence stretched across half the town from boardrooms to judgeships. But Arya had spent her entire career choosing the uncomfortable truth over the convenient silence. She wasn't about to stop now. Down in evidence, Miguel was hunched over the burn table, scanning the metallic shards of a phone casing that had been partially fused by weather and time. Beside him, a forensic tech adjusted lighting for better photo capture. You're getting something? Arya asked. Miguel glanced up. Not from this, but the buried phone gave us enough for a partial app history. Dylan had a tracker installed on of those hiking journal things. The last recorded location was pinged 3 minutes after the photo with Cole, meaning he didn't die right after that image, Arya said. Miguel nodded. Meaning someone had time. She walked to the sideboard and pulled the evidence bag with the lipstick-stained cigarette. Nova nosed it once, then sat still. Anything from this? Arya asked. DNA swabs at the lab. But we might be looking at someone outside the Core 3. Arya frowned. Another person at the scene? Miguel didn't say yes, but he didn't say no either. I think Nova smelled someone else, Arya said quietly. When we were in the clearing, there was a moment she turned away from the body. Alert, but not scared. Like she remembered the scent. He looked at her. A fourth shadow? Possibly. The thought left a strange chill in the room. Not fear, something older, like memory. That afternoon, Arya drove the short route to the high school, parking across from the metal fence that guarded the athletic field. The clouds hung low again gray, heavy, but not yet breaking. From the car, she could see Cole on the track, alone. He wasn't running, just standing there, arms at his sides, as if waiting for something. She didn't get out, didn't need to. She watched him turn his head toward the woods beyond the fence, toward the direction where Dylan's body had been found. The trees shivered. Arya stared for a long time, then reached into the glove box and took out the statement folder for Dylan Rivers. 17 years old, reported missing by his parents 4 months ago. Left home one night and never came back. Inside the folder, stapled to the back, was a copy of a photo taken from Dylan's Instagram 6 months before his disappearance. It was a bonfire, the same group, same woods, Dylan smiling, Marcus holding up a beer, Cole with his arms slung around Dylan's shoulders, and behind them, just barely visible, a fourth face, female, unlabeled, almost forgotten, but not quite. Arya traced the shadow with her thumb, then closed the folder. As she started the engine, Nova lifted her head, ears pricked toward the trees. Some truths buried themselves deep. Others waited, patient, for rain to loosen the soil. And some waited for someone to keep digging regardless of who told her to stop. The interview room smelled faintly of bleach and nerves. One wall mirrored, one chair occupied. The boy sitting in it shifted constantly, knees bouncing, fingernails torn raw. His hoodie sleeves were pulled over his palms, like he could hide the trimmer in his fingers. Marcus didn't look like the cocky teenager from the Instagram bonfire photo. He looked like a kid trying to outrun something he already knew had caught him. Arya closed the door behind her. No badge flashing, no clipboard. Just her and Nova, quiet as breath. Nova sat at attention beside the far corner of the room, eyes locked on Marcus. Not aggressive, not even tense, just watching, like she knew something was coming. Arya didn't sit. She slid a manila folder across the table. Didn't open it. I need you to tell me what happened. Marcus blinked fast. Two already said. We were camping. Dylan wandered off. We didn't know where he went. Arya's voice was calm. Too calm. Except, that's not true. He looked up, eyes wide. His lips parted, ready to deny again. She opened the folder. Photo stills from the recovered phone, Dylan's phone. The last images before it went dark. One with Dylan, furious. Another with Cole's arm raised. A third with the flash catching a blur of movement. And one more, sharp, final. Dylan's face twisted in fear. Firelight behind him. Motion. Chaos. Marcus stared like he couldn't breathe. We pulled metadata, Arya said quietly. There was a scuffle, 3 minutes before the final GPS ping. Cole's voice in the background. Yours too. Jaden stayed quiet. But you were shouting. I wasn't. He stopped himself. Swallowed hard. She leaned forward, tone soft but unrelenting. We know Dylan didn't just wander off. Nova picked up a trail panic, adrenaline, then a sharp drop in scent. That's consistent with injury. She circled back to the rock ledge twice. Blood was found at the base. Marcus looked down at his hands. Why didn't you call for help? Arya asked. His voice broke. I didn't know he was. He shook his head like trying to knock loose the memory. It happened so fast. Arya didn't move. Marcus buried his face in his palms. His shoulders started to shake. And when he spoke again, his voice was wrecked and childlike. It was Cole. He started yelling at Dylan. Something about the video Dylan took. Dylan was drunk, and he was taunting him, waving the phone in his face. Arya felt her pulse tighten. What video? Two don't know. He said it was just a joke, but Cole went ballistic. Grabbed at him. They started shoving each other. I tried to stop it, I swear I did. He looked up, eyes red. Dylan pushed Cole first. Then Cole shoved him back, but it was harder. Dylan tripped. His foot caught something, and he just went backward. Marcus's hands lifted involuntarily, reliving the moment. There was this crack, not like a stick, like something broke inside him. And then he just stopped moving. Silence swallowed the room. Arya's voice was barely above a whisper. How long was he lying there before you left? Marcus's mouth trembled. I don't know. Maybe 10 minutes? Cole said he wasn't breathing, that there was nothing we could do. He made us swear not to call anyone, said we'd all go down if anyone found out. He wiped at his face with his sleeves, but the tears kept coming. Jaden didn't say anything, just nodded like a zombie. And me, I was scared. God, I was so scared. He looked at Arya with something close to pleading. I didn't mean for him to die. She nodded slowly, holding his gaze. I believe you, but covering it up doesn't erase it. He crumpled then, slumping forward onto the table, breath shaking. With each exhale, Arya stood and stepped back, giving him space to grieve whatever innocence had just broken. Nova remained in the corner, unmoving, her dark eyes still trained on the boy. A few seconds later, the door opened behind her. Captain Doyle. He took one look at Marcus. Then, Arya. You get it? She nodded once. Then let's bring in the others. Later that evening, Arya stood in the hallway outside the observation room, watching the playback of Marcus's confession on a screen. Doyle stood next to her, arms crossed, silent. The boy on screen was shattered, not defiant, not manipulative, just broken. Doyle exhaled through his nose. It's not murder if it wasn't intentional. No, Arya said. But it was a lie that left a mother crying into an empty bed for 4 months. He didn't respond. She looked down at Nova. She's still on something, Arya added. Nova sniffed around the cigarette again. It's not from the bonfire. It's fresher. You thinking someone came back? I think someone watched it happen. Or came afterward. Doyle's brow furrowed. And didn't call it in? Arya's jaw tensed. They buried the phone, but not the truth. He nodded, reluctantly. Keep going, quietly. As she turned to walk away, Nova hesitated, then looked over her shoulder, toward the window. The rain had started again. Somewhere beneath the weight of it, the earth continued to rot. But now, at least one voice had been heard. Dylan's name, no longer whispered in the dark. It echoed, and Arya intended to follow it to the end. Rain had carved the forest into 1,000 muddy veins, each one bleeding with time and memory. Water clung to the trees like whispers. Somewhere ahead, the sound of branches cracking under careful footsteps echoed with a reverence that felt almost sacred. Nova moved first. No leash, no hesitation, only instinct. Her snout low, ears forward, paws ghosting over the drenched forest floor as if something ancient called her from beneath it. Arya followed behind, boots thick with mud, heart heavier than it had been in days. The team flanked Hertex with bags, cameras, marking flags. No one spoke. The only sounds were the rainfall and the slow, measured breaths of a dog who knew she was close to the truth. They reached the clearing. It didn't look like much, just an innocuous patch of earth. Too flat, too quiet. But Nova stopped abruptly, turned her head toward Arya, and gave the faintest whine. The same sound she'd made the day they found Dylan's body. Arya knelt, resting one palm over the spot where Nova had paused. The soil was cold, compacted, and oddly level manipulated, but not expertly. A cover-up done in fear, not precision. She turned toward the techs. Here. The lead tech, a lean man named Wallace, nodded and motioned for the ground radar. Within minutes, the hum of equipment replaced the silence. A grid was marked. Layers below were red. Wallace frowned at the screen. There's a mass under 3 inches. Large, irregular shape, denser material embedded in softer soil. Arya didn't speak. She already knew. They began digging carefully, inch by inch. The scent hit first iron and decay, faint but unmistakable. Old blood, long dried, but still alive in the memory of the soil. Nova backed away as the techs uncovered the first piece. A stone, jagged, stained deep rust, brown along one edge. More dirt was brushed away, and there it was. A larger rock, half the size of a tire. One corner fractured and sharp, the same corner darkened by something more than just time. Blood. Still visible. Still there. Wallace leaned over it, brow tightening. That's not rain staining. That's hemoglobin compound. He turned, camera already in hand. We'll swab, photograph, get a forensics rush on the sample. Arya said nothing. Her gaze locked on the blood. It hadn't been washed away, hadn't faded with weather or time. It remained quiet, buried, stubborn, just like the guilt. Nova sniffed the edge of the rock and let out a low, trembling exhale. I think this is where he hit, Arya murmured. Wallace nodded. This rock's too heavy to move alone. Would have taken at least 2. Arya turned, scanning the woods. The same woods Cole and Marcus had run through. The same woods Jaden had never spoken about. This was no accident left in the open. Someone dragged the body away. Someone buried this. What kind of 17-year-old boys bury a blood-soaked rock? One tech muttered. Arya didn't answer. She crouched again, fingers brushing the soaked earth, then resting over Nova's back. The dog leaned into her, silent. This was Dylan's last truth. Not a campsite mishap, not a disappearance. A blow, a fall, a body left cold and alone, a cover-up. She stood. I want a full 3D scan of the area. If they moved this much weight, they left footprints, drag marks, even if they're faded. LiDAR, drone overheads, everything. Wallace gave a short nod. You got it. Nova began pacing again, this time circling outward. Her nose hovered just above the ground, mapping what memory couldn't dot. She paused near a tree, then suddenly stopped at a shallow depression by the roots. Arya moved to her side. Something caught the light. A bracelet, woven leather, soaked and nearly gray now, but still intact. She picked it up gently. It was Dylan's. This mother had mentioned it in her plea. said he never took it off. Arya closed her hand around it, the weight of it more than physical. Nova looked up at her. It wasn't just the blow that killed him. It was the silence afterward. The choices made in fear. The days that turned into weeks, into months, into a headline with no ending. Now that ending had a shape. A stone buried in mud. Blood that clung like accusation. Arya stared into the tree line, where dusk was folding over the hills. Behind her, voices rose scientific, procedural, efficient. But in front of her, only quiet remained. The kind that settles when the truth is no longer waiting to be found. The kind that mourns and warns. She took one final look at the rock before walking away. Dylan's bracelet in her palm, Nova at her heel. Some truths come screaming. Others, they bleed slowly through dirt, through silence, through the breath of a dog who never forgets where pain last stood. The name Derek Malone hadn't meant anything to Arya at first. Just another forestry contractor on the periphery of the original search grid, someone who'd signed off on brush clearing reports and terrain evaluations 4 months ago. But Nova's alert by the twisted tree line, right where the search dogs hadn't gone, triggered something Arya couldn't ignore. Now she stood at her desk in the precinct's back office, staring at a file that had just been dropped off from the records archive. Thin. Too thin. 2 pages. The original documentation from Malone's subcontract with the Parks Division. 2 signatures. No GPS logs. No terrain deviation reports. No reason why the search grid had conveniently missed the area where Dylan's body had been buried. She exhaled slowly, then tapped into the police intel system and pulled the call logs tied to Malone's work phone. She wasn't expecting much, but there it was. A number. Repeated. Unknown. Unregistered. Burner line. She flagged it for a trace. 15 minutes later, it pinged back to a tower that serviced 3 streets downtown, including the building that housed Bennett Development Group. Her eyes narrowed. Victor Bennett. The name loomed like a shadow that didn't belong in daylight. Wealthy, entrenched, powerful. Known in town as the man who funded scholarships and youth clinics. Unknown officially as the man who likely owned more people in this town than any mayor ever had. Arya leaned back, knuckles tight against the armrest of her chair. She didn't want to believe it. Not yet. But the edges were closing in, sharp and deliberate. She picked up her phone and called the tech unit. Run background on Derek Malone. Financials. I want everything from the last 6 months. The line was quiet, then hesitant. We already started. Something flagged. What? Malone received 2 lump sum deposits, different offshore intermediaries, but both were traced back to a parent account in Zurich-Under, a shell company. That shell is a client of Bennett Development. Arya's stomach dropped. She stood, eyes scanning the evidence board on the wall, past Dylan's photo, past Cole's blank-eyed stare, and toward the name she had pushed off for too long. Victor. He wasn't just behind the curtain. He'd stitched the whole stage together. She walked out of the office, Nova at her side, heading toward the archives again. She needed search logs, physical ones, the kind no one could edit from behind a firewall. 30 minutes later, buried in the corner of a dusty filing cabinet, she found what she was looking for. Search map number 42A, the grid used on day 4 of the official search effort, the one supposedly verified by both Forest Services and law enforcement. The map was marked in red, grid boxes crossed out. Arya pulled the overlay off and found a second version beneath iTone, hand-labeled with different coordinates. Slight shift, just enough to nudge searchers away from the ravine. Nova sniffed at the map's edge, pawing gently. She glanced at the name in the corner. Signed, D. Malone. Verified by A. Curran, Search Ops Liaison. Curran was clean. Retired now. But Derek Maloney disappeared after his contract ended. No forwarding address. Just vanished. But Victor hadn't vanished. He was right here, sipping bourbon behind mirrored windows in an office suite lined with real estate awards and oil paintings of fake ranches. Arya returned to the squad room, heart thrumming. Captain Doyle was pacing nearby, jaw clenched. You need something, he asked without looking. Yes, Arya said, voice low. Search warrants. I want financial subpoenas for Derek Malone and any shell entities tied to Bennett Development. Doyle turned to face her. Arya, no. She didn't flinch. We have motive. We have money trails. We have a retracted grid map and a dead 17-year-old boy. Don't tell me no when a kid's body was left to rot in the woods because someone rich didn't want questions asked. Doyle's voice dropped, almost pleading. You don't understand who you're poking. Victor Bennett plays chess while the rest of us play checkers blindfolded. You want to disappear funding for this entire department in under a week? Because he can do it. Arya stepped forward. Then let him. But I won't let Dylan Rivers die a second time, this time under our silence. They stared at each other for a beat too long. Then Doyle sighed and walked away. That was his answer. Not a yes, but not a stop either. Just a man tired of the games, too old to play them anymore. Back in the evidence room, Arya pinned the altered map on the board, then wrote 3 names beside it in red. Victor Bennett, Derek Malone, unknown offshore account. Nova lay beside her, quiet but alert, ears twitching at every hallway echo, as if she, too, could sense the noose tightening, because it was. Victor's fingerprints were everywhere, just not where ink could catch them. Yet, the notebook smelled of mildew and old earth. Its corners were chewed and curling, pages warped by time. But it held weight not just from the years, but from something unspoken that had long refused the light. Miguel held it in both hands, as if he wasn't sure it should ever be seen again. He didn't speak right away. Just looked at Arya across the dim corner of the break room where the noise of the precinct didn't reach. It was in a box, he finally said, voice rough from disuse. In my garage. I almost threw it out last spring. I didn't even remember I still had it. Arya reached for the notebook slowly. But you didn't. Miguel didn't let go just yet. His eyes, shadowed under the brim of his worn hat, searched hers for something, permission maybe, or forgiveness. I wrote things down that morning, he said, when Lucas disappeared. Not because I thought they mattered, but because I didn't trust what I saw. I didn't understand it either. I was on the Eastern Ridge Trail, like I told the others. But I left something out, something I didn't want to remember. His hand finally relaxed, and the notebook passed into hers. Arya opened it with care. The binding groaned, the paper brittle under her fingertips. She flipped through sketches, field notes, coordinates, and then halfway through words, underlined in fading red ink. 3 boys. Wrong time. 1 turned back. The date at the top read, May 14th, 2013. The same day, Lucas Rivera vanished without a trace. Arya's pulse quickened. She scanned the page, saw them just before sunrise. Trailhead by Jacobs Creek. 1 in a red hoodie. Tall, pacing. 1 stocky, quiet. 3rd boy kept glancing over his shoulder. Something wrong in the way they moved, like they were looking for something they'd lost, or hiding something they'd found. She looked up. You never told anyone this? Miguel shook his head slowly. No one wanted ghosts in the official report. And 2 didn't want to get it wrong. So I buried it, with everything else. His voice cracked. But when I saw that ravine again last week, when I felt Nova pull toward that gnarled cedar tree, it came rushing back. That same dread, same smell in the air. Arya thumbed forward 2 more pages. There were rough sketches of the boys' silhouettes. No faces, but descriptions. The one in the hoodie had long arms, wide shoulders, another with shorter legs and a nervous posture. The 3rd stood apart from the others, drawn halfway in shadow. Miguel had written next to him, didn't want to be there. She closed the notebook, hands trembling slightly. It was them, she said. It had to be. Cole, Marcus, Jaden, Miguel confirmed. Only I didn't know their names back then. They were just shapes in the mist. Arya stood, adrenaline sharpening her thoughts. This changes everything. This connects the dots back 10 years. Miguel looked down. I kept asking myself, what if I'd said something? What if someone had followed that lead? Maybe Lucas, maybe Dylan. His voice trailed off. Arya reached over and placed her hand gently on his forearm. You came forward now. That's what matters. He looked up, eyes rimmed red. You think that's enough? No, she said quietly. But it's something. And right now, something is a hell of a lot more than nothing. She walked out with the notebook pressed to her chest. Nova silently following. Back at her desk, she opened a new file and started typing. Unofficial witness statement. Miguel Reyes. Time of observation. Approx 5:40 a.m. Date. May 14th, 2013. Location. Jacobs Creek Trailhead. Subjects. 3 unidentified teenage males, now believed to be Cole, Marcus, Jaden. Her fingers paused over the keyboard. This wasn't just a connection, it was a fracture in the timeline. A hairline cracked through years of silence and corruption. Someone had seen them that morning. Someone knew they'd been on that trail the day Lucas disappeared. And that someone had stayed silent because the world told him his instincts didn't count. She stared across the room at the evidence board, where photos of Dylan and Lucas hung like bookmarks to tragedies no one wanted to finish reading. Now she had a page. A real one. From a man who'd walked the woods long before Nova ever sniffed out the scent of rot. She pulled out the photo recovered from Dylan's phone firelight between trees, and the faint shape of Cole's arm mid-gesture. Then she looked back at Miguel's sketch. The posture. The hoodie. It matched. She picked up her phone and called the forensics unit. I need enhancement on the last image from Dylan's phone. Focus on the boy in the red hoodie. Cross-check with known height, weight profiles from 2013. Match it to the school database. There was a long pause on the other end. Then, you think this ties into the Rivera case? I think we've been looking at 2 tragedies as separate stories, Arya said, her voice steady. But they're chapters in the same book. She hung up and sat back, letting the silence settle like dust. Outside, dusk began to creep in, laying long shadows through the precinct windows, the kind that swallowed corners and blurred outlines. But in her hands were pages unburied and they whispered of things that didn't want to stay hidden anymore. Nova padded closer, resting her head gently against Arya's leg. Arya didn't speak. She just stared at the names on the board, then slowly circled one in red. Cole Weaver, the boy in the hoodie, the one who turned back. The wind howled low through the pines behind Miguel's house, carrying with it the scent of damp leaves and something else, something older, harder to name. Arya stood on the porch, her arms folded tightly against the chill as Miguel poured 2 cups of coffee inside. His hands were slower now, the way they always got when memory threatened to bleed through. He didn't meet her eyes when he stepped out, just handed her the mug and stared out into the dark like it still held secrets from 10 years ago. Arya didn't press. She'd learned the silence was often the space where truth found its way out. He broke it first. I lied to you, he said quietly, about what I saw that morning. Arya's grip tightened around the ceramic, but her voice stayed soft. What did you leave out? Miguel didn't look at her. He looked through her. It wasn't just the 3 boys on the trail. It wasn't just their body language or the way the tall one kept turning around. It was what he was wearing. He swallowed. There was blood on the front of his shirt, dried in streaks, not fresh, but not old either. It stood out against the red fabric. I noticed it because he was trying to hide it, pulling his jacket across his chest like it was just the cold. But it wasn't. Arya stood still. Which one? She asked, though she already knew. Miguel blinked, shame creeping across his face. Cole. I remember his hair, the way he walked, cocky, but nervous, like someone pretending he hadn't just done something he couldn't undo. Her breath misted in the air between them. You saw blood on a teenager's shirt the morning another boy disappeared, and you didn't tell anyone? I did, Miguel said hoarsely. I told one person, and it cost me. Arya's eyes narrowed. Who? Miguel stepped back inside and returned a moment later. In his hands was an envelope, creased, aged, but carefully preserved. He opened it slowly and pulled out a folded letter, typed on thick stationery. At the top, embossed in blue foil, were the words, The Bennett Foundation for Rural Excellence. He passed it to her. That arrived at my cabin 3 days after I submitted my field note report to the interim ranger's office. A check was enclosed, and a message between the lines. Arya unfolded the letter. It was polite. Overly so. A generic thank you for Miguel's continued commitment to the stability of Pine Bend, a generous token of appreciation for his discretion, and an open invitation to attend any Bennett Foundation functions as a valued voice of the community. Nowhere did it mention Lucas. Nowhere did it deny what he'd seen. It simply redirected. Arya looked up at him. They paid you off. Miguel flinched, his shoulders hunching. I didn't cash the check. I burned it. But I didn't go back to the office. Didn't submit another report. Didn't push. And by the time the noise died down, so had the case. The notebook, the silence, the years of guilt etched into the lines on his face, it all made sense now. They used the foundation as a shield, Arya said, bitterness seeping into her throat. Used their money to keep this whole town looking the other way. Miguel nodded. They came to me wrapped in gratitude, but under that was a warning. Ugh. Arya stepped back from the porch railing, her eyes locked on some distant point past the trees. You think Victor knew? Miguel exhaled slowly. I think Victor organized it. The trees groaned in the wind. Inside, Nova whined softly, sensing tension again. Arya tucked the letter into her coat pocket. Why now? She asked. Why come forward again after all this time? Miguel looked at her, the weariness in his eyes replaced just slightly by resolve. Because Dylan's gone, and so is Lucas, and I keep waking up hearing their names like echoes in the pines. I see Nova dig up that blood-stained rock, and it won't let me sleep anymore. Arya placed a hand on his shoulder. You did the right thing. No, he said softly. But maybe now I finally am. As she turned to go, Arya felt the weight of the pages in her coat, the hollow in her gut where justice should have been. The Bennett Foundation had funded schools, trails, scholarships. Their name was etched on half the buildings in town. But now, beneath the layers of philanthropy and charm, Arya saw something uglier, the quiet efficiency of a machine built to bury truth. She drove back to the precinct with headlights off on the gravel road, the forest pressing close like it too remembered what had been done. At her desk, she laid out the photos, the map, Miguel's notebook, and the letter from the foundation. In the corner of the room, Nova sat alert, watching her every move. Arya circled Cole's name again, but this time drew a second circle around Itone for the blood Miguel saw, and the silence that followed. Then she drew a new name across the top of the board, Victor Bennett. Under it, in red, obstruction of justice, ongoing. The trail wasn't cold anymore. It was warm, still bleeding. And for the first time in 10 years, the forest wasn't holding its secrets quite so tight. Arya stood outside the cafe on Main Street, the warm scent of espresso drifting through the open door as the wind chased dried leaves down the sidewalk. Across the table inside, Maya Torres was already typing, fingers gliding over her laptop keys like a pianist who didn't need to see the sheet music. Arya hesitated. She knew once she crossed that threshold, there would be no pulling back. No quiet investigation. No chance for red tape to stall behind closed doors. Maya didn't do subtle. She did truth. Loudly. Maya looked up, spotted her, and grinned. Agent Winter, you bring me trouble or justice today? Hopefully both. Arya slid into the seat opposite her and placed a plain manila folder between them. Maya's eyebrows arched, but she didn't open it yet. She studied Arya, first eyes sharp and knowing. You look like someone who finally stepped on the real landmine. Arya said nothing. Maya flipped the folder open. It was quiet for a moment, just the hiss of the espresso machine in the background and the low murmur of the college kids at the next table. Then Maya's lips parted. Photos of the blood-stained rock. A copy of Miguel's old field note. Scans of the Bennett Foundation letter. Names. Phone records. A scribbled timeline. Victor's name highlighted. Circled. And then, underlined, Maya sat back in her seat. Holy hell, she whispered. This is a whole machine. Arya nodded. And it's been operating undisturbed for 10 years. Maya traced one finger across the scan of the letter. You want me to publish this? I want you to blow it wide open, but not recklessly. We still don't have a body. No formal charges yet, but we're close. I just need the pressure turned up. Maya smiled, but there was no humor in it. Only fire. Oh, I can do pressure. She turned her laptop toward Arya. Her screen already had a half-written headline waiting for the right spark. What happened to Lucas Bennett? Why this town may not want you to know. Arya blinked. You started without me? Maya shrugged. I've been digging since Dylan's vigil. You're not the only one who smelled smoke. She began dragging files from the folder into her digital archive, her eyes scanning everything with the quick precision of someone trained to spot the fractures in a story. There's a pattern, she muttered. Victor donates to the local search and rescue initiative the same week. The original Lucas search is called off. Forestry workers get bonuses. Reports go missing or emerged. She looked up. He didn't just pull strings. He built the puppet theater. Arya felt a chill. Not from the air, but from the sick recognition of how deep this went. I've got records from the Department of Natural Resources, Maya continued, her voice quickening now. Search area maps were redrawn mid-effort. Derek Maloney's in the Foundation's contractor ledger. Twice. For consultation services. He doesn't even own a consulting license. Arya exhaled slowly. Then we're not just dealing with obstruction. This is a coordinated cover-up. Maya tapped her screen. And the public deserves to know before Victor launches his next campaign speech about integrity and rebuilding trust. Arya leaned in. But we need them angry, not afraid. Don't frame this like a conspiracy. Frame it like a betrayal. Maya's eyes lit up. Betrayal is personal. It sells. Arya nodded. People believed in Victor. They voted for him. Donated. Named schools after him. And he named his foundation after the very boy he helped erase. Maya's voice dropped. That's a special kind of evil. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Then Maya stood. Give me 24 hours. I'll thread the facts, connect the names, post a teaser tonight. Just enough to stir the water. Arya looked at her carefully. Are you ready for the blowback? Maya grinned. This is why I got into journalism, remember? Not for the free coffee or the deadlines that kill your social life. For this, to set fires under the stories that deserve it. She picked up the folder. This is no longer your secret, Arya. It's about to belong to the people. That night, just past midnight, the first post went live. It was simple. Stark white text over a black background. 10 years ago, a boy disappeared. His name was Lucas Bennett. He was never found. But he was never really lost either. He was buried by power, money, and silence. Coming soon, the story they don't want you to remember. Lucas Bennett, Pine Bend Truth. Victor knew, under it, a single image. The corner of a blood-stained rock, glistening beneath soil. Within 30 minutes, it had 6,000 shares. By sunrise, it was trending. Hashtags, threads, old photos of Lucas being posted again with candle emojis. Former students of the Victor Bennett Institute questioning scholarships. Town hall pages flooded with comments. And then the message boards turned to anger. How deep does this go? Why did no one say anything? Is this why the search ended early? My brother volunteered that summer. They told him to stop looking after day 4. Victor Bennett needs to answer for this. Arya watched it all unfold from her precinct office. Nova curled under her desk, calm but alert. She didn't smile. There was no victory yet, but the silence was breaking. And for the first time, so was Victor's shield. The lab results came in just after sunrise. Arya stood in the hallway outside the forensics office, her thumb pressing lightly into the edge of the printed DNA report. She hadn't slept. Her mind wouldn't stop looping back to the photograph Marcus and Dylan at the Overlook, and that faint smudge of red on the discarded cigarette butt they found buried near the rock. Lipstick. Back then, everyone thought the case was about boys, about anger, about a push gone too far. But now, with one test and one forgotten smear of color, the story was shifting again. The hallway buzzed faintly under fluorescent lights. She stepped into the lab, where Kendra Pinebin's head forensic tech was already waiting, arms crossed, brows furrowed. You're not going to like this, Kendra said, holding up a second file. Arya took it and flipped to the second page. Her eyes locked onto the highlighted name. Jane Doe, number 14B06. Female. Approximate age, 15-17. Recovered in Iron Ridge County, 2013. Unidentified. Cause of death, blunt force trauma. Arya's stomach sank. The DNA's hers? Kendra nodded. Perfect match. From the lipstick trace and the edge of the filter, it's the same girl. That can't be a coincidence. It's not. Arya moved to the back table, where evidence photographs lay fanned out beneath a plastic cover. She stared at the image of the crushed cigarette again. The girl's presence had been quiet. Hidden in a moment, no one had considered until now. A trace on a filter in the soil. She was there, Arya murmured. That morning, she saw something. Oh? And now, she's dead, Kendra added grimly. 2 counties over, 1 year after Lucas vanished. The room felt smaller suddenly, air tighter. Arya's hand moved instinctively to the files beneath her coat. Miguel's notebook, the forestry bribe reports. Victor's campaign fund ledgers. Pieces. But still not the whole picture. Anything else on her? Arya asked. Kendra shook her head. She was found in an irrigation ditch. No ID. No missing person report matching her description. Brown hair, blue eyes, about 5'2", dressed like she walked out of a thrift store. Arya's thoughts swirled. She was a runaway. Or she was made to look like one. She reached for her phone and pulled up the internal database. Scrolling past old interviews and juvenile reports, she landed on an entry from 2012. Miranda Knox. Age, 16. Last seen near Pine Bend Trailhead. Lived with a foster family 6 miles out of town. Report closed due to lack of evidence. She opened the file. A scanned photo popped up. Brown hair, blue eyes, freckles under one eye. She turned the phone toward Kendra. Run her against the DNA. Now. It took 3 hours. During that time, Arya drove to the old trailhead and stood in silence, where the path forked on leading to the creek, the other into the dense ravine where the bloodied rock had been buried. Nova paced nearby, ears alert. Arya tried to picture it. A teenage girl, maybe new to town, trailing behind a group of boys. Maybe she wasn't supposed to be there. Maybe she saw more than they realized. And maybe someone realized she saw. The wind cut through the trees with a whisper like voices not quite loud enough to understand. Nova gave a low whine. Then the phone rang. Kendra's voice was tight. It's her! It's Miranda Knox! Arya gripped the phone. Does anyone know? Number. She's been listed as Jane Doe for over a decade. No one looked twice. Arya stared into the woods, her voice quiet. Until now. M. She returned to the precinct with a new fire under her ribs. The evidence board had become a battlefield of string, tape, and pinpoints of truth no one had wanted to see before. She added Miranda's photo-faded, underexposited to the board. Dylan, Marcus, Cole, Lucas, and now Miranda. Victims, witnesses, or both. She pulled a red marker and drew a line between Miranda and Marcus. If Miranda was with them the morning Lucas disappeared and she saw the push, the rock, the blood, then maybe Marcus wasn't just carrying the weight of guilt. Maybe he'd carried the threat of silence, too. The phone on her desk buzzed again. This time, it was a blocked number. She answered. Agent Winter. Silence. Then a voice. Low. Young. You're asking about Miranda Knox. Arya stiffened. Who is this? I was in the same group home. She was my friend. Arya's breath caught. She told me something once, the voice continued. Said she saw something terrible. That someone had to die so someone else could stay clean. Who did she mean? But the line clicked off. Arya stared at the receiver for a long moment. A second later, an anonymous message popped up in her inbox. She tried to talk. They made her disappear. Don't let them do it again. Arya stared at the words. She didn't know who they were yet. But she knew who led them. Victor Bennett. The file came through at 2:47 a.m., buried beneath 3 layers of encryption, and sent from a burner server routed through a shell account registered to a library kiosk in Montana. No sender, no subject, just an attachment labeled, You want the truth? Start here. Arya stared at it from her laptop, cross-legged on the edge of her motel bed, the lamplight flickering weakly beside her. Nova lay curled at the foot of the bed, ears twitching at every muffled sound from the parking lot. Outside, thunder cracked in the distance, and for a moment, everything felt like the edge of something about to break open. She clicked the file. Audio. Rough quality. Grainy, like it had been recorded in secret. And then a voice emerged, hoarse, regret-laced, and unmistakably familiar. Derek Malone. I told myself I'd take it to the grave, but I keep seeing it every night. That thing under the tarp. The way it sagged in the middle, like it wasn't just supplies. Arya froze. Victor said not to ask questions, said it was clean up, nothing more. He gave me $3,000 in cash and said if I kept my head down, I'd have a steady job for the next 10 years. A long pause in the recording, then a shaky exhale. I saw blood. Not a lot, but enough to know it wasn't just a hunting accident. Arya leaned closer to the screen as Nova stirred beside her. The old forestry worker. The one Victor Bennett had placed quietly in charge of rerouting search crews during the first week Lucas disappeared. I didn't see the face, but I saw the shoes. Another pause. They were blue, scuffed at the toe. I remember thinking they looked just like the ones that boy wore in the news photos. Static crackled on the line. I should have said something. I should have. God, I'm sorry. The file ended. Arya sat in silence. The storm outside had moved closer now, and the wind carried that late-night tension of something unraveling just past the treetops. She closed the laptop and stared ahead at the wall. Derek Malone had just placed Victor Bennett at the edge of a cover-up and hinted at something far more chilling. A tarp, blood, and shoes. She rose quickly, grabbed her keys, and drove to the precinct. The roads were slick, headlights cutting through a haze of mist and pine. Her mind buzzed with possibilities. Was it Dylan, under that tarp? Or Lucas? She didn't know yet, but either answer meant one thing. Victor had touched the scene. Back at the station, she uploaded the audio into the evidence server, locking it under triple verification. By the time the sun breached the horizon, the case file labeled Lucas Wren, Missing Person, had been renamed. Wren Investigation. Homicide cover-up. Potential witness suppression. When dawn cracked over Pine Bend, Arya sat across from Chief Halverson, with her hands folded tightly on the table. She played the audio again, this time on speaker. His jaw clenched as the confession played out. By the end, he was silent. I want a warrant for Victor's campaign finances, and I want surveillance on Derek Malone. He's going to try to run, Arya said. Halverson nodded slowly. You really think Victor moved the body himself? Arya looked him square in the eye. I think Victor orchestrated a lot more than we're ready to admit. Can we trust Derek? No, she replied. But his guilt is loud enough to be useful. By noon, word had already started to ripple across the cracks and town detectives seen entering the forestry office. Derek Malone's house surrounded in quiet, unmarked cars. But Malone wasn't home. He was already halfway to the next state, his truck abandoned at a gas station 20 miles out. But Arya knew he wouldn't disappear completely. Men like Derek didn't run because they believed they could win. They ran because they hoped someone would catch them before their silence got them killed. The trap came from Maya Torres, firebrand journalist turned reluctant ally. She posted a vague tweet that morning. Forestry fraud, tarped truths, and a dead boy in the woods. Number Pine Bend. It was bait, and someone took it. An hour later, an anonymous account responded. You don't know the half of it. Check the lake bed. West side, under the rock face. The message vanished 30 seconds later, but not before Arya screenshot it. By evening, she stood once more in boots and vest, Nova by her side, flashlight cutting through pine and shadow. Maya's voice crackled over the comms. You're sure this isn't a trap? No, Arya said. But we followed ghosts for 10 years. It's time we dig up something real. And they did. Beneath the edge of the lake bed where the waterline had receded months ago in the dry spell, they found a patch of disturbed earth, shallow, recently turned, and still faintly marked by the edge of a tarp's corner, snagged on a stone. No body. But tucked beneath the tarp's fold was a small, sodden notebook, blue fabric, water-damaged, and stitched on the corner, barely visible, L.W. Lucas Wren. The first message came as a voicemail. No name, no background noise, just a flat, slow voice like gravel grinding under a tire. You keep poking where you shouldn't, girl. Maybe that dog won't wake up next time. Arya listened to it 3 times, jaw clenched, eyes unfocused. The voice was cold, practiced, like they'd said those lines before and meant every word. She hit delete, but it didn't stop there. That same night, Maya's windshield was shattered. Not a break-in, just a warning, a clean spiderweb right over the driver's side. And duct taped to the hood, a single envelope. Inside, a photo. It was of Maya, shot from across the street. grainy but unmistakable. She was holding a coffee, walking her niece through the farmer's market last weekend. Written across the bottom in black marker, "Back off." By the time she showed up at the station, hands shaking and voice tight, Arya had already forwarded her own voicemail to Internal Affairs. "This is them testing how far they can push," Maya said, eyes dark. "See who folds first." "Then we don't fold," Arya replied. "We push back." Nova, as always, stood watchfully between them, tail still, ears alert. The dog had become a kind of emotional anchor, something untouchable, incorruptible, in a case riddled with betrayal. Until that evening, it started subtle. Nova didn't leap off the couch when Arya called, didn't tilt her head like usual or bring her ball. Just stood slowly, then staggered mid-step. Her legs trembled. Her breath came shallow. And then she collapsed at the foot of the stairs. "Nova!" Arya screamed. She knelt beside her, pressing her hands to Nova's ribs, feeling the erratic thrum of her heart beneath fur that had never seemed so fragile. Foam lined the edges of her gums. Her eyes were glassy. And there, just outside the back door, was a piece of mitraw, bloodied and too perfectly placed. Laced. "Miguel," Arya rasped into her phone. "She's been poisoned." He didn't ask questions, just told her what to do. Peroxide. Keep her moving. Watch her breathing. He was 15 minutes away, but Arya wasn't sure they had 5. She carried Nova into the car, heart pounding so loud it drowned out everything but the whine in her ears. She talked to her the whole way, whispered promises, desperate prayers, old memories that bled into apologies. "You're not leaving me. Not after this. Not after everything." By the time Miguel opened the clinic doors, Nova was barely breathing. They worked for an hour. IV fluids, activated charcoal injections to flush her system. Miguel moved with precision, jaw set, eyes flashing with the same fire Arya had once seen when he'd pulled a bleeding stray off the road and refused to let her die on a cold metal table. And somehow, Nova lived. Just barely. She lay in recovery, a thin blanket over her frame, pulse weak but steady. Miguel stayed at her side, monitoring her oxygen levels like a hawk. "She's lucky," he muttered, "or stubborn, maybe both." Arya sat nearby, head in her hands, rage boiling behind her eyes. "They went after her because they can't scare me." "No," Miguel said quietly. "They went after her because you're finally close enough to hurt them." Maya showed up an hour later. She didn't speak at first, just stood there, staring at Nova like something sacred had been desecrated. Then she handed Arya a thumb drive. Encrypted files from Victor's finance guy. Guess who made a donation to a security firm 2 days after Lucas disappeared? Arya didn't have to guess. Cole's uncle. Victor's fixer. And guess what that firm owns? Maya continued, voice razor. Thin. A small fleet of drones. Surveillance grade. Operated under a private license that lets them fly outside normal jurisdiction. Arya's blood ran cold. "You think they've been watching us?" "I think they've been watching this town for a decade." It was too much. Too much rot. Too much silence. Too many years of boys disappearing, of parents mourning closed caskets, of foundations and scholarships and hollow speeches masking something colder. And now, they'd nearly killed Nova to keep it buried. "I want every name," Arya said. "You'll get them. Every connection. I'm already digging. Every file. Every trail. Even if it goes back to people we think we can trust." Maya nodded once. Especially then. The room went quiet again. Outside the clinic window, the wind had picked up, and somewhere across the street, a motion light clicked on just long enough to illuminate a figure retreating into the shadows. They were being watched. Again. But something had changed. The threats were no longer subtle. No more hushed bribes or backdoor cover-ups. Now it was violence. Now it was personal. And in a twisted way, that was its own kind of confirmation. They were getting close. Arya leaned forward and placed her hand gently on Nova's paw. "You rest," she whispered, "because tomorrow we burn it all down." The storm rolled in like a judgment thunder, snarling across a bruised sky as Jaden Carroll ran, duffel bag slamming against his back, heart punching his ribs. Victor's voice echoed in his head. Not even the kids, especially not Jaden. He wasn't supposed to hear the leak. But now his face was next to Lucas's in every thread. And Jaden knew what that meant. He was the last loose end. Mud sucked at his shoes. Rain blurred the trees. And behind him, footsteps. Pause. Nova. She was coming. Somehow, Arya had found him. Maybe Maya traced his burner. Either way, they'd sent the one thing he couldn't outrun. He scrambled up a ridge, slipped, rolled through wet leaves, gasped as the rain deafened the forest. Then, nothing. No bark, no chase, just breath. He looked up. Nova stood in the clearing, drenched, watching him like she saw through his panic and into his shame. "Don't," he whispered. "They'll kill me, like the others." She stepped forward, slow, calm. "I didn't know," he sobbed. "I was just a kid." Somewhere behind them, Arya called his name, muffled by the rain. "I didn't hurt him," Jaden said. "Lucas wanted to tell someone. I told him to stay quiet." Nova sat beside him.
"She was there too, the girl, the one with the lipstick."
She tried to help, but they took her. Thunder cracked, but neither flinched. "They made us help. With the rock. Said it was a prank. Then Lucas screamed, and there was blood." Nova leaned gently against him. When Arya arrived, boots sloshing, she approached with quiet intent. "I'm not here to hurt you," she said. "You ran. That means you care." Jaden shook. "Victor owns everything. You think a leak's enough? They'll bury it like they buried him." "Not with your voice," Arya said. "You're the last piece." He looked at Nova, then at Arya. "You promise she'll be okay? The girl?" Arya didn't lie. She just gripped his shoulder. "We'll find her." Jaden nodded. Nova nudged a muddy photo toward area half of Lucas's face, torn but not erased. For the first time in 10 years, Jaden didn't run. Later, mist curled through the trees. Jaden sat on a mossy boulder, soaked and small. Nova beside him, Arya standing near with a recorder she hadn't yet turned on. "I thought it'd fade," Jaden whispered. "But it doesn't. It waits." He stared into the fog. There were 4 of us that day. Me, Cole, Lucas, and Braden, Victor's son. Lucas had found something. A tin box. Inside, old Polaroids. A cassette. His face changed when he saw them. He said we had to go. Braden panicked. Said Lucas was messing with legacy. Cole shoved him. Lucas fell 6 feet, but he hit his head. He was bleeding, not moving. Braden said it had to look like an accident, and Jaden's fists clenched. He made me help. Said if I didn't, he'd say, "I did it. I was 12, he whispered. They used a tarponi Jaden had seen before. He helped move the body. He ran home, told his mom he was sick. I didn't sleep for a week, but I stayed quiet. Victor made sure of it. A bribe came the next day, a scholarship. My mom thought it was God. I knew it wasn't." Arya finally stepped forward. "Where did they move him?" Jaden didn't blink. "You already know. You just need me to say it." "Say it." "There's a clearing, behind the old trail. Stones in a circle. Victor's meditation spot." His voice dropped. "I think he's still there." The recorder clicked on. "I helped dig the shallow grave. I'm sorry, Lucas." Nova leaned into him again. Not in judgment, just presence. And the silence, at last, cracked. The morning was cold and gray when law enforcement arrived at the Langford estate. Cole stood in the doorway, coffee cooling in his hand. Upstairs, Victor clung to the staircase railing, suit sagging, eyes like a man who finally saw the end. Outside, black SUVs lined the drive. Inside, no more secrets waited to be hidden, only reckoning. Nova growled low from the side of the lawn, where she stood beside Arya and Maya. Her ears were forward, her body tensioned in fear, but recognition. She had always known something lived beneath the surface of this place. Now it was clawing its way up. Detective Harriman stepped forward, clipboard in hand, voice even. "Cole Langford, Victor Langfordby, order of the state attorney's office. You are both under arrest." "For what?" Victor spat, tone sharp, brittle. Harriman didn't blink. "Obstruction of justice, tampering with evidence, accessory to involuntary manslaughter, and in your case, Mr. Langford witnessed coercion, intimidation, and criminal conspiracy." A murmur went through the agents flanking the vehicles. But the only sound that broke through clearly was the snap of the cuffs as they locked around Cole's wrists. "I want my lawyer," he said, his voice low and tight. "You'll get him," Harriman replied. "After booking." Victor stepped back, face pale, fury beginning to leak through the cracks in his carefully curated shell. "You have no idea who I am, who I fund. This will blow over in days." "Oh?" Arya stepped forward then, not as a journalist, not as a daughter of the town, but as someone who had carried the weight of a missing boy's scream for too long. "I think you're right," she said quietly. "Everyone used to know who you were." She reached into her coat pocket and held up Jaden's audio confession. "But now? They know what you did." Victor's eyes narrowed. For the first time in years, he looked small, not in stature, but in soul. Nova stepped forward, nose in the air. Her gaze locked on Cole, then Victor. The fur along her spine rose slightly, not in fear, but in recognition. Arya whispered, "Go ahead." Nova walked past the agents. She didn't bark at first, just stared deep into Cole's eyes. Then Victor's, and then she let out a single, sharp bark that rang like a gavel cracking against wood. It wasn't anger. It was closure. She knew. She had always known. Cole looked away, shame finally beginning to settle across his features, like a storm cloud too long avoided. Victor, however, straightened his shoulders, eyes blazing with something primal. "This is a mistake," he hissed to Harriman. "You're burning the town's legacy." "No," Harriman said calmly. "We're finally pulling it into the light." Cameras flashed from behind the gates where Maya's post had drawn a growing crowd. Journalists from neighboring counties had come after her story, ignited like wildfire on social media posts of the cigarette with lipstick DNA, the girl in the forest, the scholarship payments, the missing boy. A trail that had once gone cold now burned white hot. They led Cole to the second SUV, flanked by officers. His head remained low, shoulders hunched. But Victor resisted, twisting toward Arya with the bitterness of a man who had never been told no until now. "You think this ends with me?" he barked. "There are others. You think you've won, but you don't know how deep this goes." Arya's voice was steady. "I don't need to know all of it today," she said. "Today, I just needed to see you fall." The cuffs clicked behind Victor's back, and he stumbled slightly as they led him away. The marble steps of his estate, once symbols of power and polish, now bore the scuff of muddy boots and justice, long overdue. Nova sat beside Arya once more, quiet, watching. As the SUVs pulled away and the estate doors stood wide open behind them, something in the wind shifted. Not a clean wind, but freer. Maya approached, phone still streaming live. Her eyes met Arya's, wide with disbelief, awe, and something close to reverence. "You did it," she whispered. "No," Arya said, voice low. "We all did. Nova, Miguel, Maya, Jaden, even the ghosts." She looked at the spot where Lucas had last been seen alive. The forest beyond the estate swayed slightly in the breeze. Like it, too, had exhaled. "Now we just have to find him." Nova leaned into her, tail sweeping gently once against Arya's boots. The war wasn't over, but the gatekeepers were gone. And for the first time in years, the truth had room to breathe. The auditorium wasn't grand. Paint peeled in the corners. Folding chairs squeaked. But that night, it became sacred, wall to wall. The people of Oak Hollow sat, those who once looked away now shoulder to shoulder beneath flickering fluorescent lights. Silence hung thick, not out of fear, but reverence. On stage, a podium stood next to an easel. A single medal rested inside a velvet frame, a navy blue ribbon. Silver heart at the center, shaped like an ear. Not human, not canine, just listening. The silent heart, an honor never given before. Nova sat in the front row beside Arya and Miguel. Her coat was brushed, gleaming under the lights. But it wasn't her shine that drew eyes, it was her stillness. She held something sacred for all of them, something beyond words. Arya rose and stepped to the podium. No press badge, no notes. Just a small brass paw-shaped pin on her chest. "Most of you know me," she began softly. "Some know what I lost. A few know what I found. But tonight, this isn't about me. It's about someone who can't speak for herself." She looked to Nova. She doesn't need to. Behind her, the projector clicked on. Images flickered. Nova, by the stream, beside the charred backpack, by the grave marker, pressed against Arya in a hospital room. Ears always listening not to sound, but to silence. She wasn't trained, Arya continued. No medals, no academy, just instinct. She listened to what the rest of us couldn't or wouldn't there. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Not unrest recognition. She listened when Lucas screamed, but no one believed him. She listened when Miguel raised concerns and was told to follow orders. She listened when a boy fled into the woods and no one chased him. Heads lowered. Justice doesn't always come from institutions, she said. Sometimes it comes from loyalty, from a creature who doesn't speak our language, but tells us the truth with her eyes. She crouched beside Nova, voice shaking. From someone who never asked for any except to be believed. The mayor stepped forward, trembling. He knelt before Nova and placed the ribbon around her neck like a final salute. Nova didn't move, didn't wag, or bark. She looked toward the back of the room. Everyone turned. A woman in a dark hoodie entered, carrying a girl no older than 6 in a jacket 2 sizes too big, uneven pigtails, eyes wide. The Jane Doe. The forest girl. The woman paused, then stepped forward. The girl slid from her arms and approached Nova. She wasn't afraid. She already knew this moment. She knelt, brushing the ribbon. "Thank you," she whispered. Nova leaned forward, gently touched her nose to the girl's forehead. A collective exhale passed through the crowd. This wasn't just a medal. It was a town's atonement. Everything unsaid finally seen. "Can I stay?" the girl asked, glancing at Arya. The woman replied, voice cracking, "If she says yes." Nova walked to Arya's side and sat. "Let her." Arya extended her hand. The girl took it, and the applause began not thunderous, but warm, like rain after fire, like forgiveness. The forest didn't remember the screams, but Nova did. Sunlight filtered through birches, dew turning silver, shadows becoming stories. Miguel moved silently through the underbrush. Nova ahead, gliding like smoke. 9 months since they last stood here. Then it had been chaos sirens, shouting, boots kicking dirt. But the truth had never been in the ground. It was in the quiet. Nova stopped. She stood by a gnarled birch, nose pointed at an ordinary patch of leaves. Miguel crouched, brushed them aside. A button, worn, blue, with white stitching like from a child's coat. He remembered Sky, the girl who said nothing, but saw everything. He slipped the button into a bag. Saturday, beside Nova. "You still remember," he whispered. Nova looked at him. He saw grief, not human, but real. The kind only animals carry. "Why'd you bring me back?" he asked. She didn't answer. Wind shifted. Miguel leaned against a tree. He used to camp here with his father, before headlines, before Lucas became a name on a flyer, before Nova, before Arya. He whispered, "I thought solving the case would feel like closure, but it doesn't." Nova rested her head on his knee. Then movement. A small figure between the trees. Sky, barefoot, jacket oversized, hands dirty, but calm. Miguel stood. "You came back." Sky nodded. She looked at the roots. "There's more," she said her first words. He followed, Nova beside them. 15 minutes through tangled trails, then a hollow beneath a cliff. Sky knelt, cleared moss. A plastic race car, chipped, blue. Lucas's. "He gave it to me," she whispered, "before he ran." Nova lay beside it, guarding. Miguel took a photo. Maybe it wouldn't mean much officially, but it meant something here. "Thank you," he told Sky. She leaned into Nova's fur, whispered, then turned to leave. At the edge of the clearing, she said, "He wasn't alone. He tried to help me." Then she vanished. The clearing had changed. It wasn't dramatic. The same trees stood, tall and steady. The same wind moved through the leaves. But something in the weight of the air had shifted, as if the forest had finally exhaled after holding its breath for far too long. A small circle of people gathered beneath the tall Pinezno press. No flashing cameras. Just those who had waited, those who had searched, and those who had never let go. Lucas Harper's mother stood at the center, her hands wrapped tightly around a bundle of blue cloth his old hoodie, preserved all these years in the back of a closet no one dared open. Her fingers trembled against the fabric, but her face stayed calm. Not dry, not detached, just calm. As if part of her had already known he was here. That she'd walked past him 1,000 times without realizing it. Miguel stood just behind her, dressed in a black coat still damp from last night's rain. His shoulders were squared, but his eyes gave him away. He looked like a man who had held a ghost in his arms and finally laid it down. Arya was on the other side of the circle. She hadn't said a word since they arrived. Her gaze kept drifting to the spot where Nova now sat stone still, eyes locked on the space beneath the roots where they'd found Lucas. She hadn't moved all morning, except to lean gently into Arya's side whenever the silence grew too thick. The vigil wasn't scripted. There were no speeches, no hymns, just the sound of wind, the gentle creak of trees, and a soft whisper of leaves brushing each other like hands in prayer. Lucas's father stepped forward first. He had barely spoken in court all those years ago. Grief had hollowed him out in silence. But now, with shaking hands, he reached down and placed a photo on the mossy ground. It was faded. Lucas, on his 7th birthday. Chocolate cake smeared on his cheeks, one front tooth missing, a paper crown tilted on his head. "I never stopped looking for you," he said, voice thin but true. "Not even when they told me to stop." His voice cracked at the end, and he turned away, wiping at his eyes with the heel of his hand. Miguel stepped forward next, not as a detective, not even as the man who had found the body, just as someone who had carried the burden of not knowing for too long. "We failed you," he said quietly, the words catching in his throat. "And yet, you still let us here. Somehow." He looked down at Nova, whose ears twitched once, as if acknowledging what he couldn't quite put into words. Arya moved last. She didn't say anything right away. She crouched, fingertips brushing the edge of the cloth bundle Lucas's mother had laid at the foot of the tree, and then she looked up. "When I was little," she began, "I thought being heard meant speaking louder, talking more, getting attention. But Nova taught me different." She paused. The forest listened. "She taught me that some things can only be heard in silence, in instinct, in presence." She looked at Lucas's parents. "I believe he's heard you. All these years, even when no one else did." A breeze stirred the trees above them. Sunlight flickered down through the canopy, a rare warmth after so many gray days. Lucas's mother lowered the hoodie to the base of the tree. Her movements were tender, reverent-like. She was tucking her son in one last time. Then she placed something beside it. A toy car, red, its paint chipped. Arya recognized it from the photo. Lucas had clutched it in almost every picture she'd ever seen. The woman whispered something only the earth could hear, and then finally stepped back. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Nova did. She rose, slowly, and walked to the base of the tree. Not sniffing, not searching, just standing. She looked at the hoodie, at the photo, at the toy car, and then, without a sound, she laid down next to them, her body curled protectively, as if keeping vigil one last time. The moment stretched, held, softened. Miguel felt something inside him shift like a lock, turning after years of rust, like a weight sliding off a shelf in his chest. Lucas was no longer missing. He was found. And in that, something ancient was being unknotted, not just for the family, but for the place itself. The air warmed. The silence deepened, but no longer felt empty. When they began to leave, one by one, no one spoke loudly. Hugs were exchanged quietly. Hands pressed into shoulders. Glances held just a second longer than usual. Nova remained by the base of the tree until the last person had stepped away. Then, finally, she stood, gave one last look at the items left behind, and padded softly back to Miguel's side. As they walked away from the clearing, the forest no longer felt like it was watching. It felt like it was resting. And somewhere, behind them, a boy finally let go. The article went live at 6:42 a.m. By 7:10, it had already crossed 10,000 shares. Maya didn't notice the numbers at first. She'd spent the whole night pacing the newsroom, second-guessing every word, every sentence. But when Arya's text came in just a single word, "Look," she clicked refresh on the analytics dashboard and saw the wildfire bloom in real time. The boy in the roots, what the system buried, a dog uncovered. It wasn't just a story. It was a reckoning. Maya had poured everything into it, Lucas's timeline. The mishandled reports, the hush money, the officials who lost the evidence, and the officers who looked the other way. She had gone back to the night Dylan fell, to the moment the town began to rot from the inside. But more than that, she'd written about Nova, not as a mascot, not as a side note, as the one who refused to forget, who listened to what no one else could hear. Nova didn't find Lucas because someone told her to, Maya wrote. She found him because something inside her knew he was still speaking, even when the rest of us had stopped listening. By noon, Nova's name was trending. A photo taken by Miguel sat at the top of the piece. Nova standing beneath the roots of the old tree, beside the toy car and hoodie. Her eyes not on the camera but looking beyond, into the unseen. It struck people. Hard. And then the flood came. Thousands of comments. Messages. Emails from people whose siblings, parents, friends had gone missing. Whose stories were never believed. Who had felt the silent weight of being forgotten. And from it, something else rose. A fundraiser. It started as a link Maya tucked at the bottom of the Art of Clean idea born over cold coffee and too many nights of grief. A public initiative for the Harper Burns Cold Case Fund, dedicated to reopening unsolved cases with the help of trained K-9 units and trauma-informed investigators. Justice doesn't expire, the tagline read. Sometimes you just need to follow the scent. Within 48 hours, it passed $300,000. And Nova Quiet, loyal, instinct-bound Novawas, now the face of a national movement. The photo of her beneath the tree was reprinted in magazines, shared on police forums, pinned on courthouse bulletin boards. She wasn't posed. She wasn't polished. She was simply present, and that was enough. Miguel watched it unfold from the sidelines, heart clenched in a strange mix of pride and ache. He'd known how special she was from the first time they met. But to see the world finally see it tweet hit deeper than he expected. One morning, a box arrived at his door. No return address. Inside, a simple velvet ribbon, Silent Heart Commendation, awarded to animals who had acted beyond training, beyond expectation, to serve humanity. Nova sniffed at it once, then nudged it gently with her nose before trotting back to her sunlit spot by the door. She didn't need the honor. She had already done what she came to do. But Arya insisted it be pinned on her harness anyway. At the first public presentation of the fund, Nova sat at the front of the stage. Behind her, a large screen played muted footage of Lucas's vigil. Arya stood at the podium, Maya beside her. The crowd was quiet, not solemn reverent. Arya looked down once at Nova, then spoke. When the system forgets, when the world moves on, sometimes it's not a voice that reminds us. Sometimes it's a stare, a pause, a bark in the night when everything else is still. She paused. I once believed heroes had to speak. Nova showed me they only have to stay. There was no need to say more. The applause that followed wasn't thunderous. It was something softer, truer, like gratitude wrapped in silence. After the event, children gathered to pet Nova. One little boy in a wheelchair leaned close and whispered something into her ear, then giggled as she licked his cheek. Nova didn't flinch. She never did. That night, Maya sat cross-legged on the floor of her apartment, watching the donation counter tick past $500,000. She felt tears forming, but not the kind that came from sadness. These were different. It wasn't just about Lucas anymore, or Dylan, or the town that tried to bury them. It was about every name never spoken, every search called off too soon, every parent who kept a light on, hoping, and Nova Quiet, resilient Novawas, now the lightkeeper, not a symbol, a witness, a living testimony that silence didn't mean absence, that instinct, loyalty, and presence mattered even more than words, especially when words had failed. The morning mist still clung to the earth, soft as breath and pale as memory, when Nova's ears twitched. She stood at the edge of the forest where the old trails forked and sunlight filtered like promise through the thinning pine sand, tilted her head, just slightly, just enough to feel something stir in the ground beneath her paws. A shift in scent, a disturbance in the hush. Then, a single bark. It wasn't urgent. It wasn't warning. It was invitation. Arya looked up from her thermos of coffee. Halfway through a sentence she would now never finish. The sound silenced everything else. Nova didn't move, just stood there, tail still, eyes locked on something the others couldn't see yet. But Arya knew that look. She'd seen it in the search for Dylan. Seen it when they found the root-bound truth. Seen it on the night the sky cleared after Lucas was laid to rest. She stood. "Another one?" Miguel asked gently, already reaching for his pack. "Maybe," Arya replied, eyes never leaving Nova. "Or maybe it's just a reminder that the world doesn't stop just because we had closure." Miguel slung the bag over his shoulder, boots crunching against the dew-kissed gravel.
"Funny thing about closure," he said. "It's never really an end. Just a quieter place to begin again."
They didn't speak much as they followed Nova. The forest had changed. It wasn't in the trees, they still leaned into each other like secrets. It wasn't in the wind, it still carried the hush of stories long buried. But something was different. Lighter, as if the ground itself had exhaled after holding its breath too long. They moved past familiar paths, the clearing where Dylan's sweater was found, the hollow where Lucas's toy car had waited like a breadcrumb. But Nova didn't stop at those places. She passed them with a quiet certainty, as if saying, "We honored this. We listened. Now, it's time to walk forward." A squirrel rustled high above. Somewhere deeper in the woods, a mourning dove cooed low and slow like a lullaby. Arya tightened her jacket around her, not from cold, but from awareness. Every footstep now felt like part of something sacred. Miguel, walking just behind, carried the silence with care. He wasn't here for noise or spectacle. He was here because some things, like justice, like grief, like loyalty, don't end with headlines. They settle into bones. They move into routine. They become the quiet reasons why people keep showing up. They walked for nearly an hour before Nova slowed. Not stopped, just slowed. She sniffed the base of a moss-covered stump, then turned her head sharply toward the east, ears alert, body poised not tense, but focused. Her tail gave a single sweep through the air. Arya exchanged a look with Miguel. "We should mark this," she said, crouching to leave a small orange flagon of the ones used by K9 teams. It was worn now, frayed at the edges. But it still meant something. Miguel reached into his pocket and pulled out a black marker. On the flag, he scribbled 2 letters, NB Nova's initials. It wasn't official procedure, but it felt like ritual. Nova padded ahead again, no longer barking, just leading. The earth dipped slightly, folding into a soft ravine where mist kissed the ground in low ribbons. Here, the light took on a different color. Not darker, just older. "Silverwood still keeping secrets," Miguel murmured. Arya nodded. "But it's listening now." They didn't find anything that day. No bones, no buried toys, no names waiting in the dirt. But that wasn't the point. The point was Nova. The way she moved with purpose, not pain. The way her paws left prints that felt like punctuation marks in a story still unfolding. They stopped at a small rise where the trees opened into sky. From here, they could see the town in the distance, the steeple of the old church, the water tower, the school where Dylan used to sit 2 desks away from Arya. It looked smaller now, quieter, but not broken. Arya sat on a fallen log. Nova curled at her feet. Miguel stood behind her, arms crossed, gaze distant. "She's not chasing ghosts anymore," Arya said softly. Miguel glanced down. "No, number." Arya smiled gently. "She's guarding what's left, and leading us toward what's next." Nova lifted her head at that, as if she understood. Maybe she did. Maybe some bonds go beyond training, beyond words. Maybe they root themselves in the quiet spaces between grief and healing. Maybe instinct is just another name for love that remembers. A breeze passed through the treetops. For a moment, it sounded like a whisper. Nova stood again. Not sudden, just certain. She looked back at them and then turned toward a trail the map didn't name. Arya rose, dusted off her jacket, and followed. Miguel exhaled once, then stepped after them. And together, dog, girl, man, they disappeared into the deeper forest. Not to chase ghosts, but to protect the living. Some stories remind us that not all heroes walk on 2 legs. Sometimes they come with fur, silent instincts, and eyes that hold more truth than words ever could. Nova's journey isn't just about solving a mystery. It's about the quiet power of loyalty, the healing found in companionship, and the bond between human and dog that speaks even when nothing is said aloud. If you've ever looked into your dog's eyes and felt understood, you already know what I mean. That connection, it's real, and it's worth nurturing. If you're curious, there's a wonderful little place I found that offers thoughtful ways to deepen that bond. Not flashy, just meaningful. I'll leave a note below in case it speaks to you. And if this story moved you in any way, maybe give your pup an extra hug tonight. They understand more than we think. Always have. Take care of each other, and thanks for walking this path with us.